Icy wind whipped down the narrow lane, carrying the faint echo of a car's engine as it sputtered, then died. Lisa's headlights raked across the old brick facade of the house she'd rented for the weekend, 5 days away from Boston's bustle, stepping into the hush of rural Massachusetts. The shutters were crooked, the porch sagged, and the faded wood looked as though it might collapse under its own history. She had arrived just after dusk, the sky a raw bruise of purple and gray. She pulled her small sedan into the driveway, the tires crunching the gravel in a sound that echoed too loudly in the emptiness. Years of work had built up to this. A few days to herself, to breathe, to write without interruptions. She carried 2 heavy bags, logic that she'd only stay a weekend, and to travel light, she'd packed an old laptop, notebooks, pens, and 1 change of clothes for each day. The house promised isolation, quiet, and a view of the woods behind it. The door creaked as she opened it, the hinges squealing protest. Inside, the smell greeted her: closed windows, damp wood, something like rot, and something else she couldn't name that her gut pulled at. She flicked on lights, one above the living dining room, one in the small kitchen. The walls were pale but stained in places, wallpaper peeling near the high ceiling. The furnishings looked decades old: worn couch, armchair with springs, a small dining table. The windows were tall. She could see the branches of the trees beyond, black silhouettes against the fading sky. She set down her bags, sighed, and sank into the armchair, pressed her head back, eyes closed for a moment. She could hear nothing but the house settling, or maybe the wind in the trees. She told herself she'd feel better once she unpacked. She flipped open the laptop, logged in, viewed the paragraph she'd been editing. But even as she typed, the silence weighed. Later, she walked into the small kitchen and found the kettle. She filled it at the sink, turned on the stove, and set it to boil. The quiet seemed to grow heavier. She even caught herself thinking, maybe I shouldn't be out here. But she had come for quiet. She had come for isolation. The kettle hissed and bubbled, steam rising. She poured tea, carried the mug back to the armchair, glanced out the window. The woods were deeper than she'd imagined. Tall pines and hardwoods pressed against the rear of the property, the forest floor dark and thick. She pulled her notebook into her lap and tried to write. Just a few pages. Maybe I can finish this chapter. But her writing seemed flat. She looked up at the ceiling, at the single bare light bulb, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Something about the room made her skin prick. A knock at the door startled her. She sat bolt upright in the chair, mug halfway to her lips. Who could that be? She stood and crossed the living room to the front door. Outside, no car, no figure, just darkness. She opened it slowly. The porch light flickered weakly. No one visible. She looked right, left, down the path to the woods, then shut the door and locked it. She returned to the chair and sat. Her heart raced, rationalizing. Probably someone passed by, or maybe a lost traveler. She shivered. Midnight came, though she didn't look at a clock. The house creaked, groaned, floorboards settled. A deep sigh seemed to roll through the walls. She lay awake in the bedroom upstairs. Small room, 1 bed, old quilt. She stared at the ceiling fan, silent, unmoving. The night was still. Then she heard something, a soft scraping, like a foot against wood outside the window. She sat up, heart thundering. The bedroom faced the woods. She padded across and peered out. Nothing, just the silhouette of trees and a strange glimmer of moonlight on a branch. Then a thump somewhere downstairs. She froze. A second later, another thump, closer. Her breath caught. She debated grabbing her phone, but thought, no, that will look silly. She told herself she'd go downstairs, check the kitchen. She should verify there's nothing wrong. She stood. Footfalls soft reached the stairs. Each step moaned. At the bottom, she held the railing and listened. Silence. Then, the kettle's ding, as though the stove's burner had just popped off. She hadn't turned anything on. She jumped. Her phone lit up with a message. Though she had no signal here, it still buzzed. She pulled it out. You're not safe. The screen blanked. She dropped it. The message came again, repeated, You're not safe. She stared. She didn't know the number. She backed away toward the living room window. The porch light had gone out. The house was pitch dark inside, except for the moonlight slanting through. She turned lights on. The living room glowed. The message came a third time. I'm watching. She dropped her phone. The battery still showed full. How was there a message? She rubbed her eyes. She wasn't imagining it. She picked the phone back up, dialed 911, but signal, no service. She closed her eyes and hailed. She told herself, this is ridiculous. There's no one. It's just an old house playing tricks. She walked to the kitchen and checked the windows. All locked. Doors locked. She carried the kettle to the sink and set it down, but she felt watched. Her mind lurched back to one of her notebooks, the page left blank. Blank because she couldn't write, because she felt the walls listening, because the darkness outside had a weight. She closed off the living room and kitchen door, locked it again. She went back upstairs and sat on the bed with the door shut. Her phone sat on the bedside table. She stared at it for what seemed like half an hour, hearing nothing but the house breathing. Eventually, she drifted into uneasy sleep. And then she was pulled back awake. She heard footsteps across the attic floor above them. It sounded heavy, sluggish, dressed in boots. The attic was supposedly unused. No stairs led there from her unit, only an access hatch in the hall closet. She pulled herself up, got out of bed, cold, hair on her arms standing up. She grabbed her phone. She opened the hall closet, light from the corridor lamp filtered in. The hatch cover was slightly ajar. She hadn't touched it. She climbed up. In the attic, the boards creaked under her. Boxes, dust, web-encased beams. She pressed the phone's flashlight. At the opposite wall, a figure standing, pale, motionless. She gasped. It didn't move. She stumbled back, lost her footing, grabbed something. Scracked. The figure blinked, stepped forward. She screamed, dropped the phone. The beam spun. The figure moved toward her, thin limbs long under the slanted roof. She scrambled down, racing back into the bedroom. She locked herself in. Outside, something thumped at the windows, something hitting the siding. She heard it go around to the front porch. The door rattled. The chain snapped and swung uselessly. The knob turned. She pressured her back against the bedroom door, trembling, clutching the phone. The signal remained no service. She dialed again. It rung into empty space. The knob rattled harder. Then silence. The thumping stopped. She rushed to the window. Outside, the moon was gone behind clouds. She looked down. Footprints in the snow. Snow? She had arrived when there was none. But on the porch the gravel lay dusted with white. She stared. The woods beyond, the tree branches heavy. The footprints extended toward the woods. Small. Too small for boots. They paused at the forest's edge, then vanished. She wrapped herself in the quilt, took deep breaths. Her rational mind kept repeating, how did these footprints appear? How did someone enter? She listened. Nothing moved. Then from somewhere below, a slow scraping, like nails across wood. She curled into herself, shut her eyes, regretted ever coming here. The hours passed until morning light crept through the blinds. In the morning, the house felt like a trap. She scoured the windows, door frames, every hinge. The hatch cover in the closet slanted again. She opened it. It was fully open. She looked up but saw nothing. She found the attic ladder in the hallway closet. She pulled it down and climbed up. This time there was no figure. But in the far corner, she found a shallow grave of snow-dusted footprints, small, barely visible, and a trail of something sticky, blackish, shining. She touched it. It was warm and slick. She gagged, wiped it in snow at the eaves, and leaned back. Something like oil or blood. She couldn't tell. She retreated. The atmosphere of the house changed. The silence weighed. That afternoon, she ventured out to the woods. She needed daylight, fresh air. She trudged along a faint path behind the house, the trees heavy and gray. She found broken tree branches and what looked like a clearing with shallow depressions in the ground, half frozen like disturbed earth. She photographed it with her phone before turning back, heart tight. That evening, the sensation of being watched returned. She sat in the living room, laptop open, but she typed one word, then deleted it. Her tea cooled untouched. The lights flickered. She ignored it until the power went out. The house plunged into black. The kitchen clock halted. In that silence, the wind outside rose. The branches scraped the windows. She lit a candle. Its flame danced like a ghost. She heard a voice, soft, distant, somewhere in the house. Lisa. It was breathy. Her name, drawn out. She froze. The candle dropped from her fingers, extinguished. Her phone lamp. She fled to the bedroom, locked the door. The voice came again, louder. Lisa, let me come in. Her phone died. Battery grayed to zero, though still full hours ago. The room plunged into darkness, except the faint moonlight through the blinds. The knob on the door started turning. She screamed. She ran to the window. She tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Someone on the other side had a hand pressed to the glass, pale, long fingers. The glass sang a crack. She backed away, threw her body against the door. It gave. She spun and saw the figure she had glimpsed in the attic standing in the hall, its limbs too long, face blank, skin translucent. It slid toward her. She lunged, raced past it down the stairs, but the living room door slammed and locked itself. She didn't remember grabbing her keys or phone. She found them in the keypad drawer by the door. They were hot as though someone held them. She flung her bags over her shoulder, threw open the front door. Outside, the snow lay deeper now. No footprints aside from the ones from earlier. The figure emerged from the doorway, silent, following her. She sprinted to the car. The door would not open. The key fob pressed, lights flashed, but nothing. The figure glided across the yard. Pale in moonlight, its face turned toward her with expressionless eyes. She sprinted toward the path, heart pounding, lungs burning. The woods loomed ahead. She burst into the trees, snow crunching underfoot. Behind her, the house lights flickered one last time before going dark. She felt something brush her shoulder. She spun. Nothing. She ran harder, through the woods, branches slapping her face, panting, fear driving her. She didn't look back until she reached the road. No car, no lights. She found a hollowed tree trunk, crawled in, shivering, waited for dawn. When morning came, she trudged back to the house. The snow had melted partly, footprints gone. The front door hung open slightly. Inside, the kettle sat on the stove, still warm. The laptop in the living room flickered with a door-open signal. On its screen, her document had been overwritten. The first page read, "We see you," in jagged font she had never created. She backed out of the house and called a taxi from her phone. Signal returned only when she reached the road. She didn't look at the house again as the car pulled away. Later, back in Boston, she tried to write an article about what happened. She looked at the photo of the shallow clearing in the woods and noticed tiny handprints around the depressions, too small for a child, each with long fingers. She screened, captured the footprints in the attic, and enhanced the image. The black slick revealed to be bruised flesh strain, like some creature's tracks. She closed her laptop and pushed it aside. She told herself she'd never go back to that house. She told herself there must be a rational explanation. A prank, someone living in the attic, an old fault with the power, unstable wiring, her mind playing tricks under stress. But she couldn't dismiss the feeling, the phone messages, the shadow that wasn't human. One night, some weeks later, as she sat in her apartment working, her phone buzzed. Same number. Message, "I'm coming home." She stared at it. The night outside was quiet, the city lights shimmering, safe. But she felt the air grow heavy, the lamp above flickered. Her door rattled slightly. The next morning, she left Boston for good, took a leave from work, moved to a different city. She couldn't continue with her manuscript. She couldn't sleep properly. She still dreams of that house. Sometimes she wakes to hear scratching at her window, or her name called in a voice like wind through trees. The nightmares always circle back to the same moment, the front porch at midnight, the footsteps in the attic, the figure waiting in the hall. She doesn't tell many people. They'd call her crazy. But she keeps the images, the phone logs, the memory. And sometimes when she's home alone and the wind moans just right, she checks the windows, listens for thumps at the door, wonders if the figure is still watching somewhere out there. Because she's seen the footprints, she's felt the breath of something not human close by, and she knows now, you are not safe when you think you are. Story the end. The small town of Ashwood was the kind of place that people moved to for peace, safety, and the illusion of community. Nestled between dense pine forests and a slow-moving river, it had the kind of quiet that could feel comforting in daylight but oppressive when darkness fell. Emily Carson had been living there for nearly a year, having taken a job as a nurse at the local hospital. She had grown used to the lull of small-town life, the friendly nods at the corner grocery store, the predictable patterns of the post office, the oddities of neighbors whose personal business seemed to be public knowledge. Life was uneventful, bordering on boring, and she liked it that way. One crisp October evening, Emily was driving home from a late shift at the hospital. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving an eerie twilight that made the forested roads feel tighter, as though the trees themselves were pressing in. Her car's headlights cut narrow beams through the fog that had begun to settle, and she noticed a figure standing at the side of the road. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, dressed in dark, ragged clothing. She slowed, thinking he might need a ride. As she drew closer, something about his posture made her uneasy. He stood unnaturally still, head like a statue, and when she rolled down her window to ask if he needed help, he didn't move or speak. Only his eyes, wide, unblinking, and hollow, stared back at her. Emily's throat tightened. The rational part of her mind told her to drive on. The small-town upbringing told her to help. She decided to inch forward. When she was almost past him, he suddenly stepped into the road. Emily slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, and the car fishtailed slightly, but she managed to stop. She looked up, heart pounding, and the man was gone. There was no sound, no movement, nothing, just the empty road. Shaken, she drove the remaining miles home in tense silence, glancing nervously into the rearview mirror at the thickening darkness behind her. When she reached her small, two-story house at the edge of town, she locked the doors and sat in the living room for a while, telling herself it had been a trick of the fog or her imagination playing on her exhaustion. The next morning, Emily noticed something odd. Her front yard was littered with small sticks arranged in a pattern that resembled crude arrows, all pointing toward her house. She brushed it off as a prank from teenagers, though Ashwood was too quiet for such antics, or at least she thought it was. She cleaned it up, threw the sticks in the fire pit, and tried to forget about it. Over the next week, strange things escalated. She began noticing signs that someone or something was lingering near her property. At night, she would hear footsteps crunching over the gravel driveway. Shadows flitted across her windows, and sometimes she thought she saw figures watching from the tree line. One night, she found her porch swing moved to a different position than where she'd left it, as if someone had been sitting there. Emily reported her experiences to the police. Officer Daniels, a stocky man with a perpetually tired expression, took notes and nodded sympathetically. He said they'd keep an eye out, but reminded her that Ashwood had a very low crime rate. She didn't expect much to come of it, but the feeling of being watched continued. Then came the messages. They started subtly. First, a small sticky note on her door that read, "I see you." Then, the words were scratched into the fogged-up bathroom mirror. Emily began documenting everything, taking photos and videos, hoping to prove to herself that she wasn't going insane. She made the mistake of telling her neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, a spry woman in her 70s who claimed to know the town's history better than anyone. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Callahan said over tea, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you don't want to know who's been watching. People like that don't stop until you disappear." She refused to elaborate, only shaking her head and clutching her teacup tighter. Emily tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a stalker. Maybe it was someone who had been obsessed with the quiet town newcomer. She increased her home security, installed cameras, and began sleeping with a kitchen knife under her pillow. But the sense of dread grew heavier each day, pressing in on her chest like a physical weight. One evening, after another long shift, she returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. Panic surged through her. She fumbled for her phone and called the police. When Officer Daniels arrived, he found nothing. There were no footprints, no signs of forced entry. But then Emily noticed the walls. Words had been etched into them, large and jagged. "You can't hide." The discovery pushed her over the edge. She spent the night awake, flashlight in hand, inspecting every corner of the house. But sleep came eventually, heavy and dreamless, only to be broken by the sound of whispering. She awoke to find the knife gone, her bedroom window open, and faint, muddy footprints leading from it to the living room. Emily left Ashwood that morning, checking into a hotel in a neighboring town. She tried to convince herself she was safe, that distance would protect her, but the unease didn't fade. Her phone buzzed at odd hours, displaying messages with no sender. "Don't run. It's closer than you think." Weeks passed. Emily considered going to the authorities again, but each attempt was met with dead ends. No calls traced, no emails logged, no prints found. The terror became routine, gnawing at her sanity. Friends in her new town noticed her jitteriness, the constant glances over her shoulder, the way she flinched at shadows. Then one night, it happened in the hotel room. She was woken by the sound of something scratching at the walls. She shone her flashlight toward the bathroom and froze. The door was ajar, and inside, the tiles were smeared with something dark and wet. She stepped closer and saw words written in the grime, "I know where you live." Her phone rang at that moment. Emily froze, the blood draining from her face. The caller ID was blank. She answered with a trembling voice. A voice, low and rasping, whispered, "Did you think leaving would save you?" Emily dropped the phone, screaming. When she looked up, the bathroom door slammed shut on its own. The hotel staff found her the next morning, crouched in the corner, rocking back and forth, muttering incoherently. The room was covered in streaks of black, the walls etched with words she couldn't read. No one could explain it. The police ruled it as a severe psychotic episode, possibly stress-induced. But Emily knew the truth. She moved again, this time further away into a city where the crowds were dense and the streets chaotic. She changed her name, deleted social media, and avoided any patterns. Yet the feeling never left. Shadows lingered in corners, strange whispers filled quiet rooms, and her dreams were haunted by the hollow-eyed man from the road, standing at a distance watching. Months later, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, her apartment, taken from the window across the street. On the back, scrawled in familiar jagged letters, "Welcome home." Emily packed immediately, leaving the apartment in the city behind. She stayed in hotels, motels, anywhere she could find temporary refuge. She no longer slept deeply, ate irregularly, and spoke to almost no one. Friends faded away. She was too afraid to maintain relationships. Years passed, and she learned to live in a constant state of vigilance. But the final straw came one night when she returned from a brief grocery run. Her car tires crunched over gravel, and for the first time in years, she felt relief, thinking she might have lost whoever or whatever was following her. She reached her temporary residence, unlocked the door, and froze. Inside, a message was written across the wall in what appeared to be blood. "You can run, you can hide, but one day I will be inside." Emily fled immediately, abandoning her belongings, her identity, her life. She became a ghost, moving from town to town, never staying long enough to unpack, never lingering long enough to make roots. But no matter how far she went, no matter how carefully she avoided being seen, the messages followed. Notes slipped under doors, texts from unknown numbers, scratches in the frost of car windshields. Always the same tone. "I am watching. You cannot escape." One rainy evening, exhausted and paranoid, Emily sought refuge in a small cabin in the woods, hoping isolation would finally protect her. She barricaded the doors, windows, and even the chimney, thinking the seclusion would deter the unseen observer. That night, the wind howled through the pines and the rain lashed against the roof. She slept lightly, listening to the storm, waiting for the inevitable. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message flashed, "Look outside." Heart racing, she hesitated, then drew the curtain. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw him. The man from the road, the hollow-eyed figure who had haunted her for years, standing just beyond the tree line. His gaze was fixed, unblinking, and when he raised a hand, it was as if he beckoned her to step outside. Emily ran. She ran into the storm, into the woods, away from the cabin, away from the man. She didn't stop. The rain drenched her, mud sucked at her boots, branches tore at her skin, but she ran. And then, suddenly, she stumbled into a clearing and froze. There, carved into the trees, the ground, and even the rocks, were the words, "Welcome home, Emily." She realized, with a crushing, soul-deep terror, that no matter how far she ran, he had always been ahead of her, always there. There was no escape, no safety, no peace. The next morning, hunters in the area found the cabin empty. No trace of Emily, just her belongings left behind, and the words etched deeper into the forest, "I see you." Story the end. It was a cold November evening when Jennifer Kane pulled into the small grocery store parking lot in the dusky fringe of her hometown. Maplewood wasn't the sort of place that demanded too many late-night runs, but when she realized she'd forgotten milk earlier that afternoon, she hadn't given it much thought. She strode past the lonely row of shopping carts and the flickering neon open sign, grateful for the hum of fluorescent lights inside the market. The world outside felt big and silent, stretching itself into nowhere. She rolled her cart past the usual aisles, cereals, canned tomatoes, frozen pizzas. The place was nearly empty, except for one elderly gentleman hunched at the end of the dairy aisle, tapping a cane against the linoleum. Jennifer paused when she noticed he wasn't facing the shelves, but staring at her, his eyes bright and unblinking, white as spark leaves in midwinter. She forced a smile and turned away, grabbing a gallon of milk and moving on. The moment she reached the checkout, her phone buzzed in her handbag. It was a text from her sister Katie. "Don't forget the key. Mom's going to bed early, I think." Jennifer took it as a cue to hurry. She paid, wheeled the cart outside where a brittle wind rattled the shopping cart bay, and loaded the milk into her hatchback. That's when she spotted something odd. The old man from inside the store was walking toward the parking lot now, slowly, cane tapping, his head bent perhaps more than necessary, his eyes fixed directly on her. He didn't look like a man heading for his car. He looked like a man who'd found something he liked and was coming closer. Jennifer paused, stood still in the pale glow of the lot lighting. He came closer, his steps steady, and by the time he was 15 feet away, she realized neither of them had spoken. She felt a curling panic in her stomach. What did he want? She gripped the car door handle as though it might somehow change into a door locked tight. Just as she opened the door, he tipped his head sideways and said softly, "You left the door open." It was a statement, not a question. Jennifer froze. "What door?" she asked. He gestured behind him toward the store entrance. "The store door. You left it open." She looked. The automatic glass doors were indeed wide open, an unusual sight as there's usually an attendant or at least a sensor kicking them shut. But beyond, the store's lights were on, no workers visible, the bell above the door silent. "This door?" she asked, her voice quivering. He nodded. "You left the door open. It lets things out." Jennifer swallowed. I'm sorry?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tapped his cane again and stared. She shut her own car door quickly, locked it, and sped off. She didn't look back. That night, she slept poorly. Knowing her mom would be asleep by the time she got home, Jennifer sneaked into the house and set the milk in the fridge. She noted her mom's old plaid robe draped over a chair, the TV on muted. She didn't wake her. She just walked upstairs, changed into pajamas, and climbed into bed. The wind rattled at the windows. A low clack of branches against glass sounded like someone knocking. She drifted off, half dreaming of the old man's eyes. But something pulled her up around 3 in the morning. The house was silent except for one faint noise, an intermittent scratching, like claws against wood, coming from the basement door at the end of the first-floor hallway. Jennifer sat up, heart racing. She told herself it was just the wind, just a tree branch brushing a vent. She listened, but the noises kept coming. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Each time it awakened a little fear pool in her chest. Summoning courage, she slipped out of bed, put on the robe, and padded barefoot down the hall toward the basement door. Light from the hallway fell across the crack beneath the door. The scratching stopped as she approached. She swallowed. Carefully, she opened the door and flicked the light switch. The basement was dark, the concrete steps leading down to something unlit. She flicked the light again. Nothing. Suddenly a sound, a heavy exhale just behind her. She spun around, saw nothing, then turned back toward the stairs. Halfway down, she froze. The light was on now, a faint buzzing overhead, and in the corner by the cluttered shelf, she saw it. Something black, something crouched, low to the ground, shape elongated, limbs long and spindly. Her breath caught. There was a rustle, then it moved. It didn't stand, just shifted its weight, arms dragging, legs bent, head tilted. It had no face, she could see. Jennifer backed up, the basement door closing behind her with a soft click. She sprinted upstairs, slammed the door and locked it, trembled as she ran to her bedroom, pulled the covers over her head, and stayed there until dawn. When morning came, the basement door was open again. She frowned. Surely she had locked it. She called her mom downstairs. The basement looked undisturbed, except for something sticky on the low shelf. A dark smear, like something greasy rubbed against the wood. Her mom frowned, but said maybe one of the kids tracked something inside. Jennifer wanted to believe that. She cleaned it up discreetly, smeared bleach on the floor and stairs, and told herself it was nothing. Over the next week, strange things happened. The lights in the basement flickered at odd times. Once late at night, the basement light came on alone, stayed on for 30 minutes, then shut off. She heard whispering when she passed the hallway, low voices, soft but distinct. She told her mom she thought the house was getting creepy, and her mom laughed it off, called it Old House Creaks and the Wind. Jennifer didn't sleep well, though. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought of the old man, tapping his cane, saying, "It lets things out." One evening, she'd returned late from a friend's house. She parked, walked quickly to the front door, unlocked it, and inside she heard the TV downstairs suddenly switch on to static. She paused at the top of the stairs. She flicked the light in the hallway. On. She stepped down, half mumbled hello to her mom, who was asleep on the couch. Then she heard the basement door click. It opened. She froze. She watched as the basement light flickered on from the first floor vantage point. Something was going on down there. She sat on the stairs, fumbling for her phone. She called 911, but before an operator answered, the light in the basement went out. Then, rushing steps up the stairs from below. They were heavy, wet-sounding. A shape burst into the hallway. The black figure she'd seen last time, but now it carried something long and rusted. Maybe a pipe, maybe just a heavy metal curtain rod. It lunged at her. She screamed, heard her mom rise from the couch, flipping on the lamp. The figure froze in the glow of the lamp. Its head was twisted at an unnatural angle, its limbs too long. Its face, she still couldn't make out a face, just darkness, but she heard a low whisper. "Shows." She bolted past it, sprinted up to her room, shut the door. Her mom followed behind, shouting her name. Jennifer locked the bedroom door and called 911 again. By the time the police came, the figure was gone. They found no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the basement, just the light that had been on for 30 minutes, the front door unlocked and the basement door open. They asked if she'd heard anything. She told them about the figure. They looked at each other. "Are you sure?" the lead officer asked. Jennifer nodded. Something personal, something deep in her voice made him frown. He told her to stay the night at a friend's house, and they'd send someone to check the house later. That night, Jennifer stayed with Katie. They laughed about how haunted the house seemed, but deep down, Jennifer felt shaken. She couldn't sleep. She texted her mom to ask if she was okay. Her mom answered, "Mom's fine. The house is fine. Don't believe in ghosts." 2 nights later, Jennifer returned home to find the basement door closed, light off, everything seemingly normal. She sighed relief, told herself she was done letting fear run her life. She went upstairs, changed into comfy clothes, took a bath, came down for a sandwich. She switched on the TV and sat down. That's when she noticed something on her phone, a missed call from home. She called back. Her mom answered, voice trembling slightly. "Jen, something's wrong." "When, Mom?" she asked. "I heard footsteps in the basement. I saw it." "What? What did you see?" "A tall, long arms. It looked at me. I couldn't move." Jennifer grabbed keys, sprinted home. On arrival, the porch light was off, the front door unlocked. She pushed it open and called for her mom. Silence. The couch sitting room was empty. She flicked lights on, the TV was on. Then she heard a gurgle from the staircase leading down to the basement. She froze. She swallowed a sob. She descended. The basement stench hit her first, damp, rotten wood and old cloth and something metallic. The light flickered on the second step. The shelves were toppled over, items scattered, cans, broken glass, what looked like blackish smear tracks leading away. Her heart hammering, she followed the tracks to a corner. And there it was, crouched in a fetal-like position, its face in shadow, arms wrapped around its knees. It lifted its head slowly, and its mouth stretched in a long, thin grin. It hissed something, though the sound broken, more like a choke than speech. Jennifer screamed. The thing stood, its limbs elongated, its body far taller than the ceiling. It slammed upward, head scraping the joists. It charged at her. She turned and ran. She bounded up the stairs, bursting into the living room, heart pounding, blood in her ears. But the front door slammed shut behind her as she hit the top step. She tried the doorknob. It wouldn't turn. She shoved, her phone dropped, the screen cracked on the hardwood. She looked toward the stairs. The thing's tall black figure appeared at the top, looming inside the light of the hallway lamp. The moment its foot hit the hardwood, the bulb above the lamp exploded in a flash of white, then darkness. Jennifer hit the floor, crawling toward the couch, desperately inching to the phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The figure's breathing sounded like wind rushing into a microphone. Police arrived. They found her sitting on the couch, weeping. The basement door was closed. Upstairs, a lamp had smashed on the floor. The house smelled foul. They again found no footprints, no signs of entry from outside, no clue how the being came or left. A forensic team came. They questioned Jennifer and her mom. They searched the house for hours. They found smears of some dark viscous material in the basement and a pitted mark on the wood floor where something heavy had struck, but nothing they could identify. They chalked it up to an intruder, a trespasser, advised them to stay elsewhere for a few nights and install cameras. Jennifer moved in with Katie temporarily. The house was cleaned, cameras installed. For weeks, nothing. Then one night, the cameras pinged. Motion in the basement. The image showed the door slowly creaking open, then a blur walked past the lens, tall and elongated, stooped. A shape darted across frame. A low whisper in audio, "It told me." Jennifer shivered as she watched the clip. She returned home cautiously, every shadow seeming to twist. One late night, she decided to explore the basement again, now equipped with a flashlight and her phone. She crept down the stairs. The light flickered overhead. The shelf where the smear had occurred still looked odd. Some boards warped. She touched them, cold. The floor beneath her vibrated faintly like a low hum. She shone the flashlight around. Then she heard a whisper. It wasn't the kind of voice you recognize, just a drawn-out sigh, a breath. "It opens for me." Her blood froze. She spun around. No one, but a silhouette stood at the far end of the basement, between boxes, its arms slowly lifting a piece of ceiling panel as though preparing to drop something in. She ran. Her mind screamed. She vaulted up the stairs, slammed the door. Her mom was upstairs in bed. Jennifer shook her awake. They decided to sleep in the living room that night. The basement door remained locked. They heard nothing. Morning rose pale and cold. Jennifer got up. The basement door was slightly ajar. She pressed it shut, locked it. She called the landlord, reported the incident. The landlord visited, looked around, found nothing. The cameras recorded nothing that night, but the door opening on its own at 3:17 a.m. She asked the lead officer if there was ever any report of similar sightings here. He said yes. In the 1980s, a family living on the same street reported a shadow person in their basement. Long limbs, no face. They moved. He said there's no clear explanation. Weeks passed. Slowly the tension eased, though Jennifer always felt watched. She started back to work, tried to sleep normally. But one evening, as she was leaving the grocery store where she worked part-time, she saw the old man again. The same cane-tapping man from the earlier incident. He stood under the flickering light outside the store and waved at her. His eyes glowed white in the street light. He didn't speak, he just watched. She walked past quickly. The air felt colder around him, the wind shifting. He raised his cane and tapped 3 times, then turned and vanished into shadow. That night, she dreamed of the basement. She found the door open, and the figure inside was not crouched. It was standing tall, mouth stretched into a grin, and behind it hung a board with words carved, "It lets things out." She bolted upright, sweat on her skin. The wind rattled her window, echoing with a tap, tap, tap. She realized then that maybe the old man hadn't been warning her about the door of the store. Maybe he was warning her about the basement door. You left the door open. From then on, Jennifer would never leave anything unlocked. She'd keep every door latched and dead-bolted. But every time she heard a sudden bang or a whisper, she glanced at the basement door. Because she knew it wasn't just fear. It was him, that tall black figure. And she knew that whatever it was, whatever had been let out, it wasn't done. Months later, when uprooted by moving to another town, Jennifer still stared at every unfamiliar shadow. She was attending therapy now, telling parts of the story. The therapist asked if maybe she'd misseen something, if perhaps she had an overactive imagination. Jennifer said no. They also found the smear, the footprints that vanished, the door that opened by itself. One day she got a package at her new apartment. Inside was an old glass milk bottle, surprisingly intact, no label. There was a handwritten note. "Thanks for leaving the door open. Now I know how." She dropped it on her floor and never answered the sender. She lost sleep again. She felt watched. And the next night that whisper returned. Barely audible behind the small storage closet. "Closed is safe." She shivered. Story the end. I moved to the quiet outskirts of Ravenwood, a small town in the American Midwest, to get away from the chaos of city life. I'd spent years in corporate offices, bright lights, and constant noise. Here in Ravenwood, the air felt cleaner, even if the old Victorian house I purchased came with faded wallpaper, creaking floors, and a history no one cared to talk about. From day one, things felt a little off. My first evening, I unearthed an old ledger hidden under the floorboards in the attic. It was covered in dust, bound in cracked leather, and the entries spanned decades. Names, dates, short notes, some banal, others ominous. Next to the ledger, I found several faded black and white photographs. Each photo showed the same room, the house's parlor, but with different people, different times. In one, a tall man in a dark suit stood beside a woman in a long dress. In another, the same room was darker, the wallpaper torn. The people looked grim. I shrugged it off. Old houses have histories. Maybe this one had more than usual. As days passed, I began noticing sounds. Slow footsteps across the attic floor above me at night, even though I was the only one in the house. The temperature would drop suddenly in the hallway, and there was always this faint smell of damp and old smoke, even though there was no fireplace in the corridor. One evening, I invited a new acquaintance, Sarah, over for dinner. She'd grown up in Ravenwood and knew some of the local lore. The wallpaper in my dining room was peeling at the edges. I replaced the light fixture overhead, which in the old photographs looked very different. The wood paneling in the house groaned with every visit, and the windows rattled slightly when the wind picked up. Over wine, Sarah mentioned the ledger I'd found. That belonged to the house's original owner, she said, voice dropping low. His name was Miles Hawthorne. He owned this house in the 1880s. Rumor is that, well, you'll want to see the ledger's last entries. My blood turned cold. How many entries? I asked. Just a few. But they're weird. Dates stopped abruptly around 1892. Some entries mention disappearances. Quiet ones. No investigation. Then the ledger stops. I tried to keep conversation light, but inside something unsettled. After Sarah left, I closed the windows early and left lights on longer than usual. Still, I slept poorly. Later that night, I woke, not sure why, to the sound of someone whispering my name. It was so faint I thought it might be a dream. Michael. It came from somewhere near the attic stairs, my name said in a raspy voice that felt both close and so far away. My throat tightened. I held my breath, stayed still in the dark, and eventually the whispering stopped. The old house settled again. The next day, I pulled the ledger back out. I flipped through names. Mary Hawthorne, born 1847, John Hawthorne, born 1850, Elizabeth Miles, 1860. One entry, May 3rd, 1892, Harold Stevens missing. Left this house for a walk. Never returned. Last seen standing in room above. Miles Hawthorne witnessed. Then, May 10th, 1892, Mary Hawthorne found in parlor at dusk. Silent. Eyes fixed. Died before help arrived. And that's where the ledger ended. No more names, no more dates. I felt a rising dread. I'd unlocked a piece of the house's past, but I didn't know why it was hidden. I thought about leaving, but I just signed the mortgage. I felt obligated to stay. That very evening, the lights flickered. Not a single bulb, but a pattern. The dining room, then the parlor, then the hallway near the attic entrance. I walked to the breaker panel. Nothing unusual. The jug of water I left outside boiled and cracked, for no apparent reason. I backed away. Footsteps above me again. Slow, pacing. The attic floor squeaked. No storm if the sky outside. I grabbed the flashlight and climbed the attic stairs. The space was empty except for old boxes, the ledger I found and threw aside. The air turned ice cold. My breath came out in puffs. I heard a whisper again. Downstairs. I froze. A shadow moved at the far end of the attic, just at the edge of the beam of my flashlight. I couldn't make out features. I just saw a shape crouched near the roofline, as if it didn't belong. My mind raced. I pointed the flashlight and pressed the beam directly. I expected to see something. Instead, nothing. The shadow vanished. I raced down the steps, heart pounding, and locked the attic door. I didn't sleep that night. Weeks passed, and the house's presence grew heavier. The parlor's piano, a grand old thing, started playing by itself. A single note at first, a low C, then another, E, then G. The chords unfinished. I heard the lid open and close. I found the key down on the floor in the carpet, as if someone meant to leave it there. I locked the piano, but the sound came again. Always the same set of notes. Always midnight. I placed a video camera pointing at the piano the next night. I awoke to the whirring of the camera, the red light blinking. I rushed to the monitor. The timeline showed nothing. I skipped ahead. At 12:03 a.m., the video froze, the lid opening by itself. Then an arm appeared, pale, slender, long fingers curled. It hovered above the keys and played. The strokes slow and deliberate, CEG, just like I heard. Then the arm withdrew, the lid slammed shut, and the video resumed. My body felt numb. I watched over and over. I considered selling the house, but every bidder looked at me wide-eyed and said they sensed something in the walls. They didn't make an offer. One evening, Sarah came back. She looked nervous when I told her. She brought along a local historian, Tom. Tom combed through town records. He found that Harold Stevens had indeed gone missing in 1892 after a dinner at the Hawthorne house. Mary Hawthorne had been found dead in the parlor with no cause determined. Further, 2 other servants had vanished later, their names in the ledger. No arrests, no signings, no closure. The town never really talked about it. Tom found newspaper clipping. Residents of Hawthorne Estate claimed to hear piano late at night, estate abandoned by family. Date, July 1892. Sarah looked at me. They say the Hawthorne family fled the town after that summer. The house stood empty for years until someone bought and left. They say the house holds something, they call it the Hawthorne presence. I forced a laugh. Well, I guess I'm taking custody. Tom shrugged. If you leave, it might follow you. Some say the presence stays with the property. Others say it attaches to those who reside there. Great. Just great. That night, the temperature plunged again. I wore a heavy coat indoors. The attic door opened slowly with a creak, and the stairs, footsteps descending. I held the camera. At the bottom of the stairs was standing the tall man from one of the photos. Dark suit, pale face, sunken eyes. He stared at me. I couldn't look away. He tilted his head, whispered, "Stay." His voice carried through the wood like a cold wind. I stumbled back. Camera clattered. I shut the door and locked it. My heart fought out of my chest. Over the next days, I stayed mostly upstairs. I didn't turn out lights. I used flashlights at night. The shadow figure appeared in mirrors, behind me, in the corner of my eye. My phone captured nothing. On one restless night, I heard banging beneath the floorboards of the parlor. I pried up a floorboard and found the ledger again. How it resurfaced, I didn't know. It lay on top of the joists, open to the last blank page. I looked at it. The leather binding split. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting not like the neat entries, a message, scrawled in what looked like dried blood. "You next. Stay." I dropped the ledger, heart racing. My mind screamed. I stood there, sweat freezing on my skin, listening. The banging stopped, then soft footsteps again. I closed the floorboard and replaced it. I didn't sleep again. At dawn, I packed a bag. I won't live like this. I'd sell or run away. But when I turned around, I saw the figure again in the parlor doorway, the tall man. He pointed to the ledger, then to me. My stomach lurched. I understood. This presence had claimed ownership. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom, called Sarah to meet me at the house and help me get out. I told her everything. She arrived quickly, knocking at the front door. I opened it and pulled her inside. The parlor was empty, but the piano lid stood open, one key depressed. The room was cold, more cold than before. Sarah took a deep breath. "We do this now," she said. We walked to the attic for the first time together. The attic stairs groaned. At the top, the floorboards glowed faintly from the beam of my flashlight. The shadow figure crouched again by the roofline. The tall man. Sarah wanted to run. I didn't let her. We stood frozen. The presence pervaded the attic, silent but overwhelming. The old boxes shifted, the air whistled, then a whisper, "You cannot leave." Sarah gasped. I felt a pull as if something grabbed me. The figure dissolved into darkness. The attic air changed. Hot, now, oppressive. One of the boxes slid off the shelf and hit the floor with a loud crack. That snapped me out. We fled down the stairs, full speed, the door slamming behind us. We ignored the rest of the house and drove off into the dawn. We didn't speak much. I watched the rear-view mirror. I swear I saw the tall man standing at the attic window, waving us off. Or maybe just standing. Back in town, Sarah and I met with Tom. We filed the house for sale. The property lawyer handled everything quickly. The house sat empty. Weeks later, I returned to collect some personal items. The for sale sign still in the yard. The leaves were piling up. I walked in through the front door. It was silent, too silent. The air felt thick. I went to the parlor, the piano key still depressed. Then I heard the faintest note, C. No one nearby, no breeze in the closed house. The one low key. I froze, then E, then G, the chords I knew. The lid opened slowly. I stepped back. A figure appeared in the dark corner of the room. Pale face, dark suit, the same figure. He pointed to me again and whispered, "Stay." I lashed out and raced out of the house. I slammed the door and ran to my car. My heart hammered so loud I'm certain the neighbors heard. I dialed the real estate lawyer. "I want out," I said. "I want to terminate everything." He told me contracts had been signed. The buyer had already closed escrow. I was still legally tied for at least another month until paperwork finalized. "Would you like me to forward the documents?" he asked innocently. I swallowed. "Yes, please." At home, I locked every door and window. I taped black plastic over the windows. I slept in the living room with a baseball bat. I kept the ledger hidden under a mattress. I thought the presence might follow me, though I left the house. Maybe it takes those who attempt abandonment. Several nights later, I found the ledger's blank final page had been turned. On it was written, "Welcome home." My blood ran cold. I hadn't even been home for days. The phone rang. I looked. No number displayed. I picked up. A whisper, faint, "Stay." Then the line went dead. My light flickered. I flicked it off and on. It seemed normal, but shadows moved in the periphery of the room. I turned on the baseball bat and peered into corners. Nothing visible. I thought I heard scratching beneath the walls. Days became nights with little difference. Anxiety gnawed at me. I told Sarah and Tom. They warned, "Don't keep the ledger. Destroy it. Burn it." But something stopped me. Fear? Curiosity? I couldn't destroy it. One stormy night, I woke to footsteps at my door. I sat up, bat in hand, and stared. The door handle rattled. I got off the couch and tiptoed to the door. The hallway light flickered. The door cracked open slowly. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. Pale face, dark suit. I shrieked, swung the bat, and the figure backed off. The door slammed shut. I heard footsteps descending my staircase. I followed, bat ready, heart in my throat. At the bottom, the hallway light died, plunging everything into darkness. I waited, listening. One slow step, then another. The tall man's whisper, "Stay." The hallway light overheard clicked back on. At the end of the hallway, he stood there, closer than ever. I swung wildly. He vanished. The door to the house outside was open. I ran outside into thunder and rain, naked to my fright. I pounded the porch light, got inside, and locked it again. I called a vacation at my friend's lake house. I left that night, packed minimal, ledger in hand, my car speeding out of town behind rain-slick pavement and waving trees. At the lake, I tried to relax, but the ledger's weight on my passenger seat reminded me I brought the house with me. At the cottage, I placed the ledger on a table near the window overlooking the water. I turned the radio on low. I tried to sleep. At midnight, the piano chords sounded from inside the cottage, not my house, not connected to the estate. In my head, I heard the footsteps again. I bolted upright. The window was open. I didn't open it. The ledger had shifted. The page open to the "Welcome Home" inscription. I tossed the ledger into the fireplace. The flames crackled, consumed the leather binding. I heard a whisper, "No." I froze. The fire flared high. The dancing shadows on the wall formed an image. Tall figure, suit, pointing at me. Then the fire stuttered, went out. The ledger burnt down to ash. I watched the embers, hands shaking. Relief washed through me. Until I heard the piano note again, C, from the porch. I ran. The piano in the cottage? No piano there. I ran outside. Rain hammered down. I looked toward the forest on the far side of the lake. I saw a glint of a tall figure, dark suit, standing barefoot by the trees, staring at me. Cold air rushed across the water. I turned the headlights of my car toward the figure. It didn't flinch. Then it lifted one hand and waved. I slammed the car door, turned the key, and it wouldn't start. Thunder cracked. The figure advanced nearer. My phone died. I pressed the starter again. Nothing. I jumped out, grabbed the bat, ran around to the figure. It stopped at the shoreline, water rising to its ankles. We were face to face, finally. Pale face, dead eyes, black suit drenched. It whispered, "Belongs to me." My heart dropped. "What do you want?" I screamed into the wind. The figure opened its mouth, but no sound came. Instead, a pressure pressed on my mind, a burden. The figure reached out its hand. I flinched. Then the world tilted. I woke hours later, lying on the lake pier. It was dawn. Rain had stopped. I stood. Car gone. The cottage door open. Inside, everything broken. The ledger ashes still on the hearth, but the ashes formed the same inscription. You next. Fear clenched my heart. I ran to town. I drove into Ravenwood, neighborhoods I barely recognized in daylight. I stopped at a hardware store, bought a big lock. I ran to my own house, found it boarded up. The for sale sign gone. I couldn't believe it, but the house was gone. Bulldozed. The lot empty. No foundation. No yard. The only thing left, a solitary tree at the edge. I backed away fast. On returning to my friend's lake house, I found the piano, oddly delivered to the cottage. It sat in the parlor room, brand new, the lid open, one key depressed. I didn't recall buying a piano. I certainly didn't ask for one. I touched the keys. The depressed one played C. Then the next one played itself, E, then G. I screamed. I smashed the piano to bits, wood splintering, strings snapping. I dug out the wires. I set the pieces alight outside. Flames devoured the wood. Still, I felt watched. Weeks passed. I moved across the country, changed my name, traded in my car, rented a small apartment that felt safe. I never mentioned the house, the ledger, the presence. Yet sometimes at night I wake to the faint sound of 3 notes, C, E, G. And in the dark corner the tall figure stands, silent, watching. Story. The end. Cold wind whistled through the open window of the old farmhouse on the outskirts of Blackwood, Ohio. It tugged at the thin curtains, shrugged against the wood floorboards, and seemed to teasingly carry a whisper of something just out of earshot. Autumn had arrived, the trees shedding golden leaves at night, and the air felt charged with something unsettled, though no one could say what exactly. Evelyn Parker had inherited the house from her aunt, her father's sister, a woman she barely remembered. Aunt Marion had never married, never had children, and rarely left that rural patch of land for anything more lively than a visit to the county fair in Springfield. When she passed, she left the house to Evelyn, who lived in Columbus, working as an assistant librarian at the public library and spending evenings devouring books about local legends and ghost stories. She thought she was ready for something unusual. She believed she was prepared. She did not anticipate what would follow. She arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The car's windshield wipers moved in a lazy rhythm, the rain smacking the glass softly. As she pulled into the driveway, the overgrown grass reminded her that the house had been unoccupied for some time. Ivy crept up the sides of the red brick building, window panes glimmered like dark mirrors, and the front porch sagged under the weight of years. The paint peeled from the door, and the brass knocker looked dull, streaked with rust. Inside, the house smelled musty and faintly of mothballs. Evelyn flicked on the lights, but many bulbs were burnt out, so the hallway remained half-shadowed. She set her suitcase down and wandered through the rooms. The living room with a stone fireplace, the wallpaper, outdated, pattern faded, clawing at the plaster in places, the kitchen, with an ancient stove in full view of the back porch, the bedrooms upstairs, each with a whisper of disuse. She told herself it would be fine. She cleaned, opened windows, let fresh air in, lit a fire in the hearth, and pulled out boxes from the attic. Old photographs, Aunt Marion's letters, a battered diary. At first, she sifted through them with curiosity. Diary entries from the 60s, black and white photos of Marion and friends, pages about daily life. Nothing eerie, just life. Sunday dinners, neighborhood news, poems about the Midwest. But then things began. Quiet things. The very first night she heard footsteps upstairs, just above her bedroom. Light tap, tap, tap. She paused the audiobook she was listening to. She held her breath, listened. She told herself it must be creaks of the house settling. Old houses do that. She pressed a pillow over her ears and drifted off. The next morning, she noticed the front door was slightly ajar. She could have sworn she had locked it. Her mind rationalized, maybe the wind or she forgot. Still, the sensation of being watched sat heavy on her chest. At the library later that day, she couldn't shake the feeling. She looked over her shoulder more than usual, felt her phone vibrate even when it didn't, spotted movement in the reflection of the glass. When she returned, she found muddy footprints on the kitchen linoleum. Not hers. A trace of soil on the sole of someone who walked outside the back porch. She stared at them, heart pounding. She thought maybe she had cleaned at the wrong time or tracked dirt herself, but the pattern was clear and unfamiliar. She snapped a photo. Then she cleaned the print, locked the door, and stayed awake the rest of the night, listening. The third night, the whisper came. It sounded like a sigh and a soft voice. She sat upright, her heart beat hard in the darkness. The voice, Eve Lynn. A scrape on the attic door overhead. The floorboards above her room groaned. She denied it. She turned on the bedside lamp and searched the room. Nothing. The window closed, no sign of intrusion. The hairs on her arms stood erect. She swallowed the fear, rolled off the bed and found the old diary again, flipping through late entries. One read, December 12th, I heard it last night, something scratching beneath the floorboards. I fear I may be losing my mind. It was her aunt's handwriting. The next morning, she called an electrician to fix the lights. While waiting, she searched for local records about the house. She found a newspaper article from 1974. A teenage boy, Michael Brewer, vanished from the property for 3 days and turned up bloody in the nearby woods. He claimed he had no memory of what happened. Another article from 1985 reported Aunt Marion had installed new subfloor supports after a collapse in the kitchen, saying she heard voices and then the ground breathing. The villagers whispered that Parker Place always had trouble. Still, Evelyn told herself she was just imagining things. That night she went to bed early, eager to reclaim peace. Sleep eluded her. At 2 a.m., the hallway light flickered. Then the presence. The silhouette. She felt it step into the room, a figure that hung in the air just past the footboard, dark and indistinct, yet unmistakably there. She froze, paralyzed, throat dry. Evelyn, the figure said, voice thin and echoing. She hadn't said her name aloud. Why'd you come here? The voice seemed both curious and cold. Her brain screamed rational explanations, sleep paralysis, auditory hallucination, drafts. And yet, slowly she blinked and tried to focus. The figure had no face, its body shifting like smoke. She tried to scream but found nothing coming out. The figure moved toward the window, paused, looked back, then vanished. The sound of rain was louder now, tapping relentlessly. She bolted upright, trembling, swore she heard the attic door creak again. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, she packed a bag and considered leaving, but the dust of attachments held her back. She cooked coffee, cleared her mind, and promised herself she'd stay one more night. As she wandered the house, cleaning, she found more. Faint marks on the underside of the attic floorboard. Scratches, in no clear language but what looked like claw marks. She found them behind the old trunk. She opened the trunk and discovered Marion's notebooks, full of sketches. The house in cross-section underground, places where Marion believed tunnels existed. Not safe, one page read. Don't listen to it. Evelyn took a photo. She reached out to the local historian at the county library, Mr. Harlan Kinsey, who greeted her when she asked about the house's past. He told her the land used to be part of a small mining operation in the early 1900s. Collapsed shafts, heavy equipment, he said. Some folks moved away after mining accidents. He pulled out an old map. This area here could have an entry, abandoned. Nature's reclaimed it. But there are always reports of voices of seeing shapes in the woods. My grandmother used to tell me when she walked past at dusk, she'd hear a man calling for help, echoing out. Evelyn felt unsettled. That evening, as darkness crept earlier, she heard the back porch door open. She lay in bed, stiff as a board, counting the seconds. The floor above her groaned. Something thudded in the attic. The smell of wet earth filled the room. Then a scratching at the ceiling, like nails. She sat up, grabbed her phone flashlight, slipped on slippers, and walked toward the stairs. She turned on the attic light. The bulb flickered and died. Darkness swallowed her. Slim beam from the phone revealed the attic was empty, but the floorboards swelled like skin, slightly moving. She looked at the underside of the attic floor. She heard a rumble. Something pushed up from below the house, a movement she felt rather than saw. She staggered back and knocked into a box. The trunk opened, and inside, a page fell out. It was a handwritten letter from Marion. They come through the cracks. The tunnels feed them. I cannot stop them. They ask for a body. Evelyn dropped the letter, heart pounding. The house seemed to breathe, air thin, stale. The window in the living room rattled. She tried to calm, convinced herself she'd lost it. She locked herself in the upstairs bedroom, pulled pillows over her head. Sleep eventually reclaimed her, though uneasy. She awoke early to heavy scraping at the bedroom door. Light from the hallway spilled in as the door creaked inward. A figure stood there. Tall, lanky, black silhouette, eyes red glinting. Later she would swear she smelled rot. She froze. The figure shifted its head. "You're here. Thank you." That's all it said, the voice dry, brittle. Then it turned and walked away into the darkness of the hallway. The door closed softly behind it. Evelyn did not scream. She did not chase it. She couldn't move. In the morning, she found muddy footprints again, but this time they formed a trail from the upstairs down into a floor vent in the living room. She followed the trail, shining her phone flash. She lifted the grate. Underneath, she found an opening, an old metal ladder descending into blackness. Her mind raced. She called Mr. Kinsey. He arrived in the afternoon. He brought a pry bar, flashlight, old helmet. Together they descended into the darkness beneath the house. The air was damp and stale. They stepped onto a metal platform, then walked through a narrow mine shaft. The walls dripped water, wooden beams rotted, supports bent. At the end they found a chamber. Walls scorched, strange symbols scratched in the stone, rusted mining equipment. The central floor had a pattern of feet, like someone had paced in circles for years. Mr. Kinsey gasped. "I wasn't prepared for this." He showed her a map. On it, this chamber marked as ventilation, but local legend marked it as the Lost Shaft. Evelyn's mind configured. This must be the place Marion had discovered and feared. While they studied the chamber, a low moan echoed from the darkness of the shaft entry. They turned lights to the tunnel. The beam caught something, a pair of eyes, then a body. An emaciated man, covered in mud, climbed slowly out, his clothes ragged, face hollow. "Help me," he whispered. Evelyn stumbled back. Mr. Kinsey raised his flashlight. "Who are you?" The man muttered, "They brought me down. I can't leave." Before they could move, the lights flickered, and in the far corner of the chamber, shapes emerged. They looked human, but elongated, faces twisted, mouths too wide. Their skin pale, veins visible, they hovered near the walls like shadows made flesh. The man on the ladder screamed and bolted back down into the darkness. One of the creatures advanced toward Evelyn. She backed up, tripped, fell into a puddle of water, thick with sediment. The creature touched her arm. Her blood felt warm. She cried out and ran, up the ladder, past Mr. Kinsey, who shouted behind but couldn't catch her. She burst into the living room, slammed the vent grate shut, locked the door behind her. She pounded and sobbed, whispering, "Oh God, oh God." The house outside seemed quiet, unbelievably quiet, the distant thunder of rain beyond the windows mocking her relief. They didn't talk much afterward. Mr. Kinsey left once the sun dipped and darkness spread. Evelyn sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind. The attic door overhead creaked, the vent grate rattled, tiny footsteps above her ceiling. She pulled the blanket over her head. In the pitch dark, she heard the voice again. "Thank you for coming." She didn't sleep. She waited for daylight, then packed her bag. She planned to leave. But she hesitated. The house had a hold, something intangible. Maybe it was the mystery, maybe the inheritance, maybe the unseen promise of answers. She called a friend, told her she'd drive back to Columbus tomorrow morning. That night, the creature returned. Not in the chamber, not crawling out of the vent. This time, it came into the house. She saw it in her peripheral vision. Standing in the kitchen, she froze. It emitted a dry, rattling laugh. "We welcomed you." It moved toward her, limbs cracking with each motion. She screamed, bolted, retreated to the front door, but it slammed shut before she reached. The creature followed. She raced to the living room, ignited the fireplace. The flame flared high and the creature recoiled. She watched it shrink away into the shadows. The flame flickered out. She didn't wait for it to return. She picked up her bag and ran outside into the rain. She locked the door and drove away without looking back, tires spitting gravel behind her. In the rearview mirror, she thought she saw someone standing on the porch, tall, still, red eyes shining. But when she blinked, it was gone. In Columbus, she spent days in her apartment, asleep with lights on, sleep-deprived, replaying every moment, every whisper. She looked into her phone. She had one photo of the symbols, one of the footprints, one of the diary letter. The rest of the memories seemed dreamlike. She called the police to report the intruder and the vent. They looked skeptical but opened a case. Weeks passed, and slowly things became routine again. The shadows receded. She tried to push the events away, but one night she woke up to her phone buzzing, a message, "We are always with you." It was from an unknown number. Her heart stopped. She turned on the lamp, nothing. Then she heard footsteps on the floor above. The hairs rose on her arms. She fled again. This time she moved back home with her parents. She told her story. They murmured concern but framed it as a breakdown. She didn't care. She didn't sleep well. She quit her job. She started researching underground tunnels, the old mine shafts around Blackwood. She found another news article about a group of men in the 1920s digging illicitly for veins of coal and discovering strange creatures they called the Lost Ones, which is more lore than fact, but enough. According to that article, one of the men disappeared, and his brother muttered, "We awakened them." She felt the story under her skin. Months later, she got a call from Mr. Kinsey. He had gone back to the farmhouse to remove older equipment, archives, and asked if she still wanted the house. She told him she did not. He paused. "There's a brand new map of the shaft I found behind Marion's papers. It leads deeper than we went." She absorbed that. "I'll lease it out. I don't want to go back." He laughed softly. "I don't blame you." She thought that was the end. Life resumed. Yet one Friday night, she awakened to a knocking on her apartment door. She peered through the peephole. Nobody. Then the door rattled again. She inched back, phone in hand, dialed 911. The camera light flickered on. Outside, she saw footprints in the foyer, muddy, thin like those she'd seen in the farmhouse. She pressed the camera against the glass. The prints stopped at the lift. She opened the door partway. No one. She felt the air drop in temperature. She heard that voice again. "Welcome home." She slammed the door shut, locked it, called her parents, told them she'd stay with them. They came. The next morning, she opened the apartment entrance. No prints, nothing. Just clean tile. She checked the security camera footage. It showed a shadow passing the door at 3:14 a.m. A figure slender, humanoid, eyes glowing faint red, stepping into the frame for 1 second, then gone. She watched it in disbelief. Then she saw the next frame, the figure at the staircase, glancing up, turning its head at the camera, smiling wide. Too wide. She didn't sleep that night either. She packed her things and planned to move to a new city. But in the taxi ride, she checked her phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number. She opened voicemail. "We'll be waiting," the voice said, pitched low and static-ridden. She hung up. A week later, she received a package in the mail, a nondescript brown box addressed to her "No return." Inside was a small rusted key and a slip of paper. "The house wants you." She stared at it, hands shaking. She locked it in a drawer and called a friend. I'm done. I'm done with that house, that place." The friend found a support group for trauma survivors. She joined. She attended meetings, told her story, found solace. But still, the feeling remained. Someone, something, watching. An October storm arrived. Wind rattled the windows, leaves battered against the building. She walked outside, looked up at the sky. She thought maybe the creatures from the shaft will stay lost. Maybe a new house, a new city, means a new life. But as the moonlight caught the edges of her bedroom window that night, she saw 2 red dots in the darkness outside. They hovered, fixated. She sat frozen in her bed as the dots shifted upwards, slowly, then turned away. She breathed. It was gone. Yet when she closed her eyes, she still heard footsteps on the ceiling, the faint drip of water from unseen tunnels, and the voice. "We're here. Some things don't end, they only wait." Story the end. I awoke with the sun already forcing its way through the curtains of the old farmhouse where I'd moved only days before. I didn't recognize the soft creak beneath the floorboards that greeted me, nor the low hum that seemed to drift from the walls. I had signed the lease for the century-old place on the edge of town in rural Vermont, hoping to escape the noise and distraction of my corporate life in Boston. I expected silence, fresh air, and perhaps the faint chirping of birds. Instead, I found something else entirely. The previous tenant had been an elderly woman named Mrs. Holloway, she told me in the sidebar of paperwork, though the remarks were terse. Left suddenly, home being sold as is. The real estate agent had waved this off. A lack of interest, she said, nothing more. I should have known something was wrong when the agent rushed out, leaving me standing in the dusty living room with only the old house and the memories it carried. I shrugged off the unease. I unpacked boxes, set up my laptop in the main room, made coffee in the tiny galley kitchen with the peeling paint around the sink. The first night, I slept deeply. But the dream I had, well, that was the first warning. In the dream, I sat on the creaky front porch with a rusted rocking chair moving on its own. I heard footsteps behind me. a child's laughter echoing in the fields beyond the trees. Something brushed my shoulder, but when I turned, no one was there. When I woke, the rocking chair was still. The field was quiet. I chalked it up to stress and a new environment. I told myself it was nothing, but the house seemed alive in the silent hours. Late at night, after the world outside seemed to settle and the moon cast a pale blue light through the sash windows, I began to hear whispers, soft at first, barely distinguishable like the wind stirring old floorboards, but unmistakably human. Sometimes I thought I heard a sob or someone muttering just beyond the wall. I'd sit in the living room, lights shut off, staring at the darkness, waiting to hear it again. And each time it came. I started marking the times, 2:13 a.m., then 2:17 a.m., then 2:11 a.m., always around 2:15 in the morning, always the faint sound of crying, the low whisper, then a sudden hush. Nothing else. My rational mind insisted it was the pipes settling wood or my own imagination. But a logical sentence does not soften the sting of waking cold, hearing a girl's voice murmur, "Why are you leaving me?" And then nothing. One Thursday night, I trudged into the cold kitchen at 2:14 a.m. to refill my glass. The hum seemed stronger then, and I swear I felt a pressure on my shoulder like something leaning in. I spun, saw the empty corridor stretching behind me. The old mahogany door to the pantry was slightly ajar when I know I had closed it before bed. I stared, my reflection in the window pane beside the sink showing me clutched by fear I could not disentangle. I slammed the door shut, turned on the overhead light. The hum disappeared. The pantry remained closed. I told myself it was fatigue. The next day, I brought a friend from my town into the house. My friend, Ellen, warned me when I told her about the whispers. Maybe it's just settling, pipes, nothing supernatural. She laughed it off, but I felt foolish. I didn't want to admit that I was scared. We sat in the living room, sun streaming in, tasseled curtains dancing at the breeze. "So show me," she said. I focused and waited. A minute passed. 2. Then a sob. It came from the far corner by the staircase. It was soft but unmistakable. Ellen stumbled back, eyes wide. That is not a pipe," she said. "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, the rocking chair quietly behind Ellen began to rock on its own. I heard the shuffle of something dragging across the hardwood. Ellen screamed and stood up. The chair ceased its motion as if embarrassed by the attention. That moment changed things. I accepted it was not imagination. The feeling in the house changed. The hum deepened. I started to get cold spots, drafts that came from nowhere, and I would watch shadows shift where there was no light source. I noticed scratch marks on the pantry door, tiny, like a fingernail's pattern, but the wood was thick and old, and I had locked it the day before. I found no explanation. My phone's flashlight showed nothing behind the walls. I decided to dig into the history of the house. Visiting the local historical society in the nearby village, I spoke to an archivist named Mr. Peterson, a thin man with spectacles and a gentle manner. He leafed through old records, newspaper microfilms, and property deeds. He told me, "This house belonged to the Millers family for decades, early 1900s. There was a tragedy here. Little girl Amelia Miller disappeared in 1923, found months later in the woods, and her father was indicted for neglect. The mother died of pneumonia weeks later. The father sold the house soon after. It's changed hands many times." He rubbed his chin. "There are rumors this house kept her, rumors that she stayed, waited." His words echoed when I returned home. I sat in the dark, listening for whispers. I thought about the girl, how her voice might linger in the corridors, waiting to speak again. Night after night, the events grew bolder. I'd wake at 2:15 a.m., the hum now like a chant, the whisper louder, "Help me." Not the soft sob earlier, but now an urgent plea. I refused to move from bed, told myself to ignore it. But one evening, I couldn't. I stepped outside the bedroom, the hallway light off, decided I would block the sound by walking into it. As I passed the staircase, I saw faint footprints, muddy childlike prints, on the bottom stair, though the front door was locked and no one visited. I froze at the footprints, and then a hand, small, pale, pressed on the balustrade behind me, and the whisper, "Come play." My blood turned slick in my veins. I couldn't move. I sprinted back to the bedroom, shut the door, locked it, pulled the covers over my head. The hum stopped. The floorboards were silent. From that night forward, I refused to stay in the house. I slept in a motel in town, but I still came back to get my things. During the day, I found peculiar details. A childish drawing in crayon behind the couch, smudged lines of a girl and a figure standing, a large circle, scribbled words, "You left me." Under the dining room table, a small spool of string tied in a knot. The pantry door, still locked, had a keyhole scratched beyond recognition. I called the agent and asked if I could break the lease. She shifted uneasily, told me to hang tight, that she would speak to the landlord, but her voice cracked. I didn't wait. I moved everything out over the course of a weekend, leaving a set of boxes in the garage for collection. On my last morning, I returned to the house one more time. I walked through the rooms, the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, the small office where I had set up my laptop. Then I stood at the top of the basement stairs. The basement door rattled. I couldn't recall ever opening it. I lifted the latch. The stairs descended into darkness. I flicked on the flashlight on my phone. The beam revealed concrete steps, walls lined with old jars of things I couldn't identify. I stepped down. A faint giggle echoed. "Who's there?" I asked. No answer. The giggle again. I advanced further, the beam sweeping across the far wall. I saw the shape of a small figure crouched by the furnace. I clicked the shutter on the camera. The figure jolted, rose in a blur. I heard something heavy hit the floor behind me. I spun around. A jar shattered at the top of the stairs. I sprinted up. The door slammed behind me. I threw it open and burst into the daylight. I didn't care what the neighbors thought as I stared up at the old house, breathing hard. The windows stared back like blank eyes. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't look back. I left behind the boxes and keys, told the agent to keep them. I generated a forwarding address with the post office. I stayed in a small apartment in town for a few days before returning to my old workplace to catch up, needing normalcy. But the story didn't end there. Not for the house, not for me. One evening, a few weeks later, I received an envelope without a return address. Inside was a photograph. It was printed in black and white, grainy. It showed the top of a staircase, the same staircase from the house, and a small girl sitting mid-step, head tilted, hair falling over her face. Underneath, in faded ink, words, "You left me." The handwriting was shaky, as if the writer were a child. My skin crawled. My heart thudded. I threw it away but retrieved it later to analyze. On the back, in red ink, "I'm holding on." No name. Terrified, I deleted the photograph and the digital backup. I felt watched. I started hearing voices in my new apartment. Soft footsteps in the hallway, distant sobs under the floor, as if the house had followed me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the envelope was from a prank or some cruel joke, but the feeling persisted. Then the phone call came. It was a local number from the town where the farmhouse stood. With trembling fingers, I answered. A child's voice whispered, "Don't leave me again." Then silence. I called back. No connection. I broke down. I found a counselor and explained what was happening. He suggested I move away, change addresses, and not engage. I did, relocating to upstate New York. But no matter where I went, I felt the presence hovering, just on the edge of perception. Once, in the middle of the night, I woke to find a small figure in the doorway of my bedroom. A girl, pale, hair tangled, eyes black hollows. She stood watching. I sat bolt upright and she vanished. I rubbed my eyes. I knew it wasn't a dream. Then one morning I received a package. Inside a small wooden box, latched shut, I found a single button. Small, mother of pearl, like one that might have come off a little girl's dress in the early 1900s. Attached was a note. "Remember me." No name again. My sleep grew labored. The whispers returned, always around 2:15 a.m., always the plea. "Help me." I heard dragging on my hardwood floor, though the apartment was carpeted. I smelled damp earth in my bedroom, like a freshly turned grave. In desperation, I contacted a spiritual medium, though I didn't believe in it. The medium, a woman named Marla, came to me in a small rented meeting room. She sat across from me, eyes closed, and said slowly, "The girl is anchored to you. You carry her fear, her abandonment. She doesn't want you to leave." I almost laughed at her choice of words, but instead I swallowed, heart thrumming. She continued, "She died here, in that house. She believed someone left her behind. When you left, you triggered her fear again." She paused. "You must return the relics to her world. You must say goodbye." I sat in the silence after she left, unable to move. The thought of returning to that house terrified me beyond belief. Yet I sensed I had to. I bought a ticket back to Vermont. The trip felt surreal. I felt every mile carry more dread than the last. I drove up through forests, the late autumn leaves dying on the trees, the moon rising fat and red. The farmhouse stood silent under moonlight, its windows dark. I slid out of the car and approached the front door. My breath came in puffs, visible in the November cold. I unlocked it. It swung open easily. Inside, the stale air greeted me. I carried the wooden box and the photograph. I walked to the corridor, hearing the faint hum. The clock on the wall of the living room read 2:13 a.m. I felt a thrill of terror. In the corner by the rocking chair, the air was cold and thick. I held the box up. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I'm sorry I left." The hum began. The rocking chair rocked itself. The floorboards creaked in hollow rhythm. I placed the box on the bottom step of the stairs and set the photograph on the seat of the chair. The whisper came, "Stay." It wasn't a plea now. It was a demand. I froze. A gust of wind slammed the front door shut, hard. I ran to it. It swung open again. I moved to the stairs. The footprints were back. I silently followed them upward, the stairs groaning beneath me. I reached the top step and turned around. There stood a little girl, same figure from my bedroom doorway, but here more vivid. She pointed at the photograph. "Leave me." Her voice echoed in the house. The air felt alive, watching. Tears streaming, I nodded. I picked up the relics and walked toward the front door. The girl followed silently. When I reached the door, I hesitated and turned. The rocking chair was rocking. The little girl was in the rocking chair, head tilted, staring at me. She held out her hand. I hesitated, then meandered over and placed the photograph on the seat beside her, the box at her feet. I said, "Goodbye." She nodded, her head falling forward. The chair rocked faster. The hum rose into a chorus of whispers until the stairway and living room seemed filled with voices. "Stay. Help me. Don't leave." Then a rush of air, a great sigh. The door slammed again and the voices vanished. The house grew cold and silent. The rocking chair stood still. I left without looking back. My breath came hard in the frosty air, but a sense of relief washed through me. I didn't pack a bag. I just drove. I never contacted the landlord. I never retrieved the boxes left behind. I didn't speak of that night for months. Eventually, I found a modest apartment in another state. I reinstated my old routines, work, gym, friends. I told no one the full story. Who would believe it? But sometimes in the middle of the night at exactly 2:15 a.m., I wake with a cold breath on my cheek and a soft whisper, "Thank you." The hum never returns, but I feel the girl's presence linger in the darkness just beyond my bedroom door, waiting. Story the end. The late summer afternoon wrapped the small town of Ash Grove, Ohio, in a haze of golden heat, the air thick and still as though something were watching, waiting. On the edge of town stood the old McAllister farm, a once proud property of red barns and fields of corn, now overgrown and half forgotten. Everyone knew of it. Kids dared each other to run behind the barn on moonlit nights. Older folks told hushed stories of the McAllisters' daughter who'd vanished 70 years ago. But most people treated it as a piece of ghost story lore, something you whispered only after a beer or two and never seriously considered. Until that summer. Camille Rhodes moved back to Ash Grove after years in the city. She was 32, had a steady job as a paralegal, and had inherited what was left of the McAllister property from her grandmother. It was a falling down farmhouse, the paint peeling, the gutters long since rusted shut. Camille didn't care. She had her reasons, a quiet place to live, a place to recover after a bad breakup. She saw potential, peaceful, remote, far from the bustle. Her friends said she was brave or foolish. She said she was tired. On her first weekend there, she wandered into the old barn. The doors were warped, wood cracked, sunlight streamed between slats, dust motes danced in the beams. She found old tools, rusted, and an entire wall covered in faded family photographs. One image showed a little girl with wide eyes and a crooked smile standing in front of the house. Eleanor McAllister, age 6, a pen scrawl on the back declared. The photograph looked 1940s era, the style, the suit the little girl wore. Something about the smile struck Camille. It was too direct, too serious. No one was playing, no one smiling naturally. Just that girl staring, knowing something. That night, Camille's phone buzzed. She hadn't expected service here, but somehow it worked. A text, "Don't sleep in the house alone. No name. She looked around, windows dark, the place quiet, maybe a prank. She ignored it. She went to bed early, still unnerved. Around midnight, she felt the house shift. The floorboards creaked far more than in her city apartment. Outside, a branch tapped against a window like a knuckle rapping. Camille opened her eyes. The room was moonlit, shadows long. In the doorway stood something faint. She blinked, but it remained. A girl, small, wearing what looked like a faded dress, pale skin. Her face was blurred by the low light. Camille thought she dreamt it. The next morning, she told herself she must have dozed off, hallucinated. Pastel sunlight filtered in. All seemed normal. But over the next few nights, small things changed. Footsteps in the attic above. Doors left open, though she distinctly remembers closing them. On the third night, she decided to sleep downstairs in the living room so she could keep one ear open. She found comfort in the sofa, the television flickering low. At around 2 a.m., the television switched off. The screen went to static. The room chilled. Camille felt someone sit beside her on the sofa, pressing warm against her side, though the room was cold. She didn't dare turn. Then she heard it. A low hum, children's lullaby maybe, soft and old-fashioned, coming from the hallway. Instinct told her to run upstairs, but shock rooted her. The hum turned into a voice. Camille. The name called out, very gently, very softly. She held her breath. The voice repeated, Camille. Then she realized it wasn't her name. She didn't say her name like that. Terrified, she wrapped her blanket and in one motion surged off the sofa and sprinted to the door, grabbing her keys and phone. She got into her car and sat there until dawn. Within days, she reached out to a local historian, the town librarian, and also checked property records. She discovered that the little girl in the photograph, Eleanor McAllister, had vanished from the house in 1945. Her body was never found. The local rumor, she wandered into the fields at night, got lost, and never returned. But more disturbing was this. Years later, neighbors reported seeing a small girl inside the house, crying in hallways, singing lullabies in the attic. The farmhouse stood abandoned for decades after, locals refusing to buy. The photograph in the barn had been left behind when the farm changed hands. Camille tried to convince herself it was coincidence. The stress, moving into an old place, the isolation. She took a friend, her old roommate Lydia, up to stay for a night. Lydia laughed at the idea of ghosts, but by midnight the unease had seeped in. Lydia heard the lullaby in the attic, heard footsteps pacing, and watched a door upstairs open slowly on its own. She got up, switched on her phone flashlight, crept upstairs, camera ready. The hallway was empty. The attic hatch stood closed. She opened it and peered in. Dust, old boxes, the silhouette of someone small by the window. When she looked up, the figure wasn't there. The breeze shifted. Lydia ran downstairs. She told Camille they should leave. Camille refused. She felt the pull of something unresolved. The house seemed to call her. She started exploring the property grounds late at night. In the fields behind the barn, she found something, a rusted bicycle frame half buried in weeds. Small wheels, a child's size. She dug around and found old scraps of fabric, faded yellow, that matched the dress in the photograph. She took pictures and sent them to the historian, expecting some logical explanation. He came back. Records show no child bicycling in those fields. The McAllister's daughter had no bicycle in the inventory when the estate was cataloged. Strange. Then came the dreams. Camille saw the girl. She stood in twilight. She watched Camille from the field's edge. She beckoned. Camille awoke sweating, heart racing. The feeling of being watched followed her into daytime. At work, she'd glance at her phone and see a shadow pass the window behind her. She'd look up and nothing. At home, the house seemed to breathe, air shifting, doors breathing like lungs. On a midnight drive home, her headlights caught a figure standing at the side of the road near the fields. A small child, still in a yellow dress, hair dark. When she slowed, the figure turned and walked into the corn rows, disappearing. She parked and got out. No footprints, no tire tracks, the field empty. She drove away, shaken. She began researching everything she could about the McAllister disappearance. Newspaper clippings noted police searched the property for weeks, found nothing. Neighbors claimed to hear a child singing. One old woman said she saw the girl in the barn window at twilight, but chalked it up to vision. Officials closed the case in 1950 for lack of evidence. Camille found one detail that caught her breath. In the original missing child report, It said the girl had been wearing a yellow dress. The photograph in the barn matched almost exactly, and the bicycle frame she found was from a child's make circa 1944. It seemed impossible, but the proximity forced her to question her isolation. One night she had a complete meltdown. She crouched in the living room, lights on, phone to her ear, voice trembling. I'm seeing her. I'm hearing her. Lydia came over and insisted Camille stay at her house until they figured things out. Camille agreed. She left the farmhouse locked, windows closed. At Lydia's place, they pored through old records. They found references to the McAllister's servants complaining of a girl in the mirror in the master bedroom. One entry. Eleanor watches when I sleep. I hear her humming. Camille shivered. They decided to go into the old barn, the original source of the found photograph. Late afternoon, in the fading summer light, they walked the gap between tall grasses to the barn. The door was still intact, though warped. Inside, the smell of hay and decay, old rodent droppings, rust, and that peculiar autumn smell, even though it wasn't autumn yet. The photograph wall still there, though nearly falling. Camille touched the photograph of the girl, Eleanor McAllister. She took it down carefully, turned it over. Handwritten in 1948, "You let me wait." Camille's blood froze. Why would someone write that? Why 3 years after the disappearance? At that moment, just then, they heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap coming from the upper loft. Something shifting. The hulking rafter beams caught the noise. Lydia froze. They both looked up. No ladder, no stairs up there anymore. The floor looked intact, but abandoned. The tapping grew into a rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 tap. It stopped. Silence. Then a low voice. "Why did you leave me?" It echoed in the barn. Lydia sprinted out. Camille, stunned, lingered. The temperature dropped. Her breath became visible. The old barn door creaked open by itself. In the doorway, backlit by the orange dusk, she saw the figure of the girl. The yellow dress, face pale, hair dark and loose. She wasn't smiling. She tilted her head. Her eyes met Camille's, dead still. Then she raised a small hand and pointed towards the farmhouse. Terrified, Camille ran after Lydia. They didn't wait. They reached Camille's car, sped away. But at the edge of the fields, Camille looked back. The barn door swung shut. And standing just beyond the field, by the edge of the corn, the girl watched them leave, leaning into the dusk. Back in town, Camille tried to sleep. She stayed at Lydia's for weeks. She called the authorities, historic society, everything. But no one believed her. They treated the farmhouse like any old property, ignored its haunted reputation. Then she received a letter in the old McAllister letterhead, sent to her home address. Envelope yellowed. Inside, a single card on heavy stock paper, written faint cursive as if long ago, "I waited, but you left." No signature. No date. Camille's dreams grew worse. She'd see the little girl in her bedroom. At night, the breathing of the house would match a child's small gasp. One morning, after a nightmare, Camille found muddy footprints on her bedroom carpet, small, child-size, leading from the window to beside the bed. The window was closed, latched. She remembered locking it. She checked where the prints led, a tuft of yellow fabric stuck under the window frame, the same shade as the dress in the photo and the scraps by the bike. Her heart hammered. She moved out, left the farmhouse locked behind her, put the property up for sale, telling the realtor to disclose nothing about ghosts. But she couldn't escape the feeling of being followed. One evening, months after she'd moved, she got a text. "Thought you forgot me." The timestamp, 2:13 a.m. She glanced at her phone. Outside rain patted on the window. She ignored it. But her phone buzzed again. "I'm still here." She stared. What could she do? She blocked the number, changed her phone. The messages stopped for a while. One day, while working at her desk, Camille got a call from Lydia. Her voice panicked. "Camille, you need to come back. Something happened at the house." They both drove out that night, moon under cloudy sky. When they arrived at the farmhouse, the front light was on. The door that Camille remembered locking was open. Inside, the air smelled of old piano wood. On the living room floor, the child's bicycle frame she thought she packed away, yellow dress laying across the sofa, the photograph of Eleanor McAllister on the floor, snapped in two, and footsteps, tiny footprints covering the hallway. They were clean, no dirt, as if they'd appeared overnight. Camille backed away. Lydia insisted they take pictures. They took dozens. The footprints ended at the attic hatch. The ladder was still missing, but the hatch was slightly ajar. The hum, that lullaby, began, faint and far above. Camille climbed on the sofa, tried to pull the hatch open. It groaned. She opened it wide and peered in. The beam of her flashlight revealed just hay and old crates. Then, in the far corner, a small shape huddled. The girl in the yellow dress. She held a small box. She looked up. Her eyes locked with Camille's. The box opened, and she pushed something out. A faded doll, cracked porcelain, one eye missing. She whispered a name. Camille. The voice so low it might have been in her head. Camille fell backwards, heartbeat wild. She climbed down. She and Lydia fled. Camille never returned to the house to stay. She hired someone to clear it, sell it fast. But even after it was sold, she felt the presence. At work, she would glance at her computer screen and see a reflection of a little girl behind her, though no one stood there. She'd check it home at night, a shape in the corner of the room. She moved apartments city-side, changed jobs, but the messages kept coming. Small knocks on windows at midnight, whispers in the air, "You left me." She'd walk into a room and the temperature would plummet. She'd feel a brush of fabric against her ankle. She'd look down and there, just for the split second of her heartbeat, the yellow dress drifting past. Finally, she sought help from a medium. The medium told her, "The little girl is bound to the place, but when you moved in, you disturbed her. She is lonely, wants acknowledgement. She followed you when you left, because you carried her photograph, her memory." Camille's rational mind fought this, but the evidence piled. The last incident, she woke at dawn, on her phone a voicemail. She listened, a faint voice, a child's voice, singing a lullaby, then softly, "Camille." She looked at the phone's display. The call came from her old farmhouse house phone number, disconnected years ago. Camille packed up once more. This time she left everything behind and moved to another state. She left the past. She thought she was done. But the final message arrived on a postcard, no return address. On it, the old photograph of the girl, now scrawled over with pencil, "You left me waiting." Front of the card bore a picture of the McAllister farmhouse at dusk, lights on in the upper window. She looked at the date. It was today's date. Postage unknown. No stamp. She never looked at the postcard again. She shredded it. But late at night, she still hears the hum sometimes, or the whisper of her name on a breeze. And when she dreams, she's back in the barn, the girl by the window pointing at her. Camille knows now, some things don't rest because they're unresolved. Some things wait. Story the end. The summer she inherited the cabin, Claire thought it would be the perfect escape from city life. The property had been in her family for decades, left untouched after her grandfather died in the early 1980s. Nestled in northern Vermont, it sat at the edge of a dense forest, far from the nearest town, the nearest neighbor miles away. Claire drove the long gravel road that twisted through pine trees, the sun dropping behind the mountains, leaving the sky a bruised purple. She pulled up to the cabin and got out, stretching, feeling the damp pine scent in the air. The cabin was smaller than she imagined, wooden, weathered, the shingles curling. A thin chimney wisped smoke from an old fire. Somehow it made the place seem alive. Or maybe she imagined it. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and dust. The floorboards creaked under her weight, and the fireplace was filled with old ash, cold to the touch. She walked through the small living room, noting the furniture, old but intact, and the shelves lined with books that smelled of age and mildew. She found her grandfather's old journal on a side table and flipped through it. The entries were short and cryptic. Open quote, "March 5th, 1974. They come in the night. Always the night. The scratching is worst when the wind blows from the north. March 8th, 1974, I tried to leave. The path disappears, the forest shifts, I am trapped. March 14th, 1974, the sound is in the walls now. They wait. Patience is their weapon. I must wait too." Close quote. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She dismissed it as her imagination. Her grandfather had been a recluse. He had a wild imagination. She set the journal aside and started unpacking. That night, the wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Claire lay in bed, listening. A soft scratching came from the walls, faint at first, then more insistent. She sat up and grabbed a flashlight, sweeping it across the small cabin. The scratches stopped as abruptly as they had begun. She shook her head. Old cabins make noises. She tried to sleep, but every gust of wind felt like it carried whispers. The next day, she explored the forest around the cabin. The trees were dense, the underbrush thick, and the further she walked, the quieter it became. Birds had stopped calling, insects had fallen silent. She noticed something odd. The trees didn't seem random. Their trunks twisted unnaturally, some leaning as if to form a corridor, and the moss on the ground formed patterns that looked deliberate, almost like symbols. Uneasy, she returned to the cabin. At dusk, she noticed movement in the shadows beyond the window. A figure, a man, thin, hunched, stood just at the tree line. She froze. He didn't move, didn't blink. She blinked herself, and he was gone. Inside, she went to check the journal again. There were new entries, handwritten in a spidery script, though she had not written them. Open quote, June 21st, 1975, she is here. They have led her. She cannot see, but they can. Close quote. Her heart pounded. She remembered the figure at the tree line. A cold dread filled her chest. She tried to rationalize, but the words seemed to claw at her mind. She put the journal away and tried to distract herself with chores. That night, she heard footsteps outside the cabin, heavy, deliberate. She went to the window and shone the flashlight. Nothing. The wind had died. The only sound was the quiet rustle of pine needles. Then, a knock at the door. 3 short taps. Claire froze. She hadn't seen anyone in miles. She whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Another knock, harder this time. She backed away. The door handle rattled. Something tried to open it. She ran to the back door, slipped out and into the dark forest, flashlight in hand. The woods were thick, but the path seemed to twist unnaturally. Every time she turned, the cabin seemed closer than it should be. She stumbled, hearing whispers just beyond the tree line, words she couldn't understand. The flashlight flickered. She looked up and saw dozens of figures, pale, thin, standing just out of reach, surrounding her. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. She ran blindly, tripping over roots and rocks, branches tearing at her clothes. When she finally reached the cabin, the door was open. The interior was changed. The fireplace was alight, though she had not lit it. The journal lay open on the floor, its pages filled with words in that same spidery script. Open quote, June 21st, 1975, she cannot leave. The forest knows her. The cabin hungers. Close quote. Claire tried to leave again, driving down the gravel road, but the path seemed endless. Every turn brought her back to the cabin. Exhausted, she finally crashed in the living room. In the middle of the night, the scratching began again, louder now, accompanied by whispers. Claire covered her head with a blanket, hoping to drown it out. Then she felt a hand, cold, thin, brush against her shoulder. She screamed and turned, but no one was there. The journal's pages fluttered, as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. Words formed before her eyes. Open quote. You belong here now. Close quote. She ran upstairs, locked herself in the small bedroom, but the window revealed the same man from before, standing in the forest, waiting. Behind him, more figures emerged. Children, adults, their faces pale, hollow. She tried to scream for help, but no sound came. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing. The figures outside the window raised their hands, and the forest itself seemed to shift, closing in. She realized that the cabin had never been abandoned. It had been waiting for someone to stay, for someone to belong. In the morning, when the sun finally rose, the cabin was empty, the forest quiet. Neighbors later reported a car parked at the edge of the woods, lights on, but no one inside. Claire was never seen again. The cabin remains. Locals speak of it in hushed tones. Hikers report seeing figures at the tree line, pale and thin, watching from the shadows. Sometimes, if the wind blows from the north, they hear scratching from within and a whisper. Open quote. We waited, and now so have you. Close quote. Story the end. The night was unusually still for the outskirts of Ashford, Connecticut. A thin fog rolled in from the river, curling around the street lamps like smoke. Jenna Clark, 26, had just finished her shift at the local diner and was driving home on the winding back roads that skirted the dense woods. The radio crackled with static, the signal breaking in and out as she turned a corner. That's when she saw it. A car parked at the side of the road, engine off, lights off. At first, she thought it was abandoned. Then she noticed movement inside, a figure hunched over, almost fetal, rocking slowly. Jenna hesitated. Something in the way the figure didn't react to the approaching headlights unsettled her. Against her better judgment, curiosity got the better of her. She pulled over, rolled the window down, and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" The figure lifted its head slowly. A thin, pale face stared at her from behind matted hair, eyes wide and unblinking. The mouth opened, but no sound came. A chill ran down Jenna's spine. She took a step back, heart pounding. Before she could react further, the figure bolted from the car, moving with an unnatural speed into the foggy woods. Jenna's first instinct was to call the police, but something held her back. She had to know what it was. The next day, she told her roommate, Laura, about the encounter. Laura, ever practical, suggested checking the local police blotter. Maybe it was a missing person. What they found chilled them to the bone. A report from a week earlier detailed a young man named Nathan Klein, last seen on that same stretch of road. Witnesses described him staring blankly into traffic before disappearing into the woods. No trace had been found. Jenna couldn't shake the image of that pale, unblinking face. That night, she decided to go back, drive the same route, hoping to rationalize the fear. She left around midnight, fog thick, headlights slicing through it. As she rounded the familiar bend, she froze. The car was there again, parked exactly where she'd seen it before. But this time the door was open. A low moan came from inside. Jenna's stomach turned. She wanted to leave, but instead she stepped closer. The air was thick, damp, carrying the faint metallic scent of blood. The figure sat upright in the driver's seat, Nathan. But his eyes were blackened, his skin gray, veins protruding like a road map. He raised his head and a guttural whisper escaped. "Join us!" Jenna stumbled back, her foot hitting the dirt. The whisper came again, closer now, though she hadn't moved an inch. She turned to run, but the fog seemed alive, curling around her legs, slowing her down. Behind her, a chorus of whispers grew, voices layering, echoing off invisible walls. When she finally reached her car, she slammed the door shut and started the engine. But the fog had followed, seeping into the cabin, cold and wet. Her headlights flickered. In the rearview mirror, she saw dozens of pale faces, floating silently behind her, staring, reaching. The next morning, the police found her car abandoned on the side of the road. No sign of Jenna. The door was unlocked, keys in the ignition. Inside, her phone lay on the passenger seat. Screen cracked. On it, a single photograph, taken from the back seat, showing Jenna asleep at the wheel, dozens of pale faces pressed against the glass, grinning. Weeks later, hikers in the woods reported seeing figures moving unnaturally among the trees, pale faces with empty eyes, whispering unintelligible words. Local authorities dismissed it as folklore, urban legend creeping into reality. Months later, Nathan Klein's parents received a postcard. No stamp, no postmark. Inside, scrawled in jagged letters, "We have a new friend. She'll see us soon." Every night since, residents near that stretch of road report fog rolling in earlier than usual, whispers in the wind, and fleeting glimpses of pale figures standing just beyond the tree line. Drivers swear they see headlights in the mist, but the cars are empty, or worse, occupied by something not quite human. The locals speak in hushed tones, warning outsiders, never stop for a stranded car on the back road. Don't look into the fog too long, and whatever you do, don't answer if someone whispers your name, because if you do, they might take you too. Jenna's disappearance was eventually written off as a tragic accident. But in the woods, among the fog and shadows, she isn't gone. She's part of the chorus now, her face pale, her eyes empty, joining the others in silence, waiting for the next driver to stop. The last photo on her phone, retrieved months later by an investigator, shows her smiling faintly, standing behind Nathan and countless others, their blackened eyes fixed on the lens, whispering, "Come, join us." Story the end. In the fall of 2016, in a quiet suburb outside Denver, Colorado, 29-year-old Michael Adams rented a small 2-story house on the edge of town. He'd just gone through a divorce and was looking for solitude, a place to regroup and start over. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but he didn't care. He needed space, peace, and the feeling of control again. The landlord, an older man named Gerald, seemed polite but distant, and when Michael asked about the price being so low, Gerald only said, "It's been empty a while. People don't stay long." Michael didn't think much of it at the time. The house was cozy enough, creaky floors, slightly uneven walls, and the faint smell of dust and pine. It had character, as he told himself. The first night, he unpacked his essentials, ordered pizza, and sat by the living room window watching the wind whip through the trees. There was an odd sense of stillness around the house, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The first strange thing happened that same night. As Michael was drifting to sleep, he heard footsteps above him. Slow, deliberate, pacing steps, almost rhythmic. But he didn't have an upstairs tenant. The second floor was empty except for a few unpacked boxes. He grabbed a flashlight, climbed the stairs, and found nothing. The windows were closed, no sign of forced entry. He checked the attic just to be sure. Empty. He tried to rationalize it. Old houses made sounds, wood shifted, wind creaked through beams. He went back to bed, convincing himself it was nothing. The next morning, he found one of his kitchen chairs pulled out facing the window. He was certain he hadn't left it that way. As he stared at it, a cold draft swept through the kitchen, making the hairs on his arms rise. Again, he shrugged it off, making a mental note to check for air leaks later. That evening, he sat at his desk in the small study on the second floor, working remotely on a design project. At some point, he realized the faint hum of his computer fan had changed. There was a different sound underneath it. Breathing. He paused, listening. It was slow, steady, unmistakably human breathing coming from somewhere behind him. He spun around, heart thudding, but the room was empty. The hallway outside was dark. He left the light on that night. Days went by and the disturbances grew more frequent. The footsteps returned, sometimes pacing through the night. Objects moved. Books fell off shelves. His keys vanished for hours, then reappeared on the kitchen counter. He woke one night to find his front door wide open, the cold air pouring in. The police found no evidence of break-in or tampering. The locks worked fine. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Michael discovered something odd. A trapdoor beneath the insulation near the far wall. It was small, maybe 2 feet across, with a metal ring for a handle. He hadn't noticed it before. When he pulled it open, a rush of stale air hit his face. He aimed his flashlight down. A narrow crawl space stretched maybe 10 feet deep, with dirt walls and old boards across the floor. Lying at the far end was a small wooden box. He climbed down, dust swirling around him, and crawled toward it. The box was covered in grime, but when he wiped it off, he saw faint initials carved into the lid, EW. Inside were a few trinkets, a rusted locket, a child's shoe, and several Polaroid photos. Most were faded, but one showed a little girl standing in the same kitchen where Michael now stood, smiling shyly at the camera. Another showed what looked like the same girl, but her face was blurred, her eyes dark smudges. The last photo made his stomach twist. It showed the house from the outside, taken at night, with a figure standing in the upstairs window. He climbed out quickly, sealing the trapdoor. He told himself it was old junk, maybe left behind by previous tenants. But that night, the dreams began. He saw the girl from the photo in his sleep, standing in his kitchen, whispering something he couldn't understand. Sometimes she was crying, other times staring blankly at him. When he woke, he could still smell the faint scent of earth like the dirt under the trapdoor. By the end of the week, he stopped sleeping upstairs altogether. He moved his mattress to the living room, kept the TV on for background noise, and slept with a light on. But it didn't help. Around 2 a.m., he heard a voice, a child's voice, calling softly from upstairs. "Don't lock me in." His throat went dry. He stood perfectly still, every muscle locked. The voice came again, closer this time, as if moving down the stairs. "Don't lock me in." Michael grabbed his phone, shining its flashlight toward the staircase. Nothing. But when he looked down at the floor, he saw small, wet footprints, tiny, bare, leading from the base of the stairs to where he stood. Then they vanished. He called Gerald the next morning, furious. "What the hell happened in this house?" he demanded. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Gerald sighed. "You found the box, didn't you?" Michael froze. "She was my daughter," Gerald said quietly. "Emily. She died here. It was an accident. She fell down the stairs while I was at work. My wife couldn't handle it. She locked herself in that attic for days before He stopped. I shouldn't have rented that place again. People say she never left, that she doesn't like anyone upstairs." Michael was silent. His skin prickled. Gerald's voice grew strained. "If you disturbed her things, put them back. Leave them where they were." Michael hung up without another word. That night, he decided to return the box to the crawlspace. He climbed into the attic with his flashlight, hands shaking. The air felt thick, colder than usual. As he knelt to open the trapdoor, he froze, because it was already open. The box was gone. A low creak came from behind him. He turned slowly. In the corner of the attic, half hidden by shadow, stood the figure of a little girl, pale, with stringy hair falling over her face. Her head tilted slightly as she whispered, "Don't lock me in." Michael stumbled backward, tripping over a beam, dropping his flashlight. The beam of light spun across the attic floor, illuminating her bare feet, coated in dirt. When he looked up again, she was gone. He bolted downstairs, heart hammering so loud he could barely hear. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The next day, he packed his belongings. He didn't care about the lease or the rent. But as he loaded the last box into his truck, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the passenger seat sat the wooden box, the same one he'd found in the crawl space. He threw it out on the roadside miles away, too terrified to open it again. But when he got home to his new apartment 2 weeks later, he found it waiting at his door. The same box, the same initials, EW. That night, he burned it. He watched it turn to ash, the wood curling, the photos blackening in the fire. He felt relief for the first time in weeks. Maybe it was over. But around 3 a.m., his phone buzzed. He groggily picked it up and froze when he saw the message. It was a picture, taken from inside his new apartment. The photo showed him, sleeping on his couch. The message beneath it read, "Don't lock me in." He left the state the next morning. No forwarding address, no contact with Gerald. He changed his number, threw out his phone, and never spoke about it again. But every now and then, in the quiet of night, Michael wakes to the sound of soft footsteps above him. Sometimes, if he listens closely, he can still hear her whisper, faint, childlike, pleading. "Don't lock me in." Story the end. It was the middle of winter when Claire Simmons decided to move into her grandmother's old farmhouse in upstate New York. The property had been empty for years after her grandmother passed, and Claire had inherited it. She wanted to fix it up, live quietly, and maybe escape the noise of city life. The first few days were peaceful. The wind howled outside, but inside, the house smelled faintly of old wood and dust. On the second night, Claire woke to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing above her bedroom. At first, she assumed it was the attic settling, or perhaps a raccoon on the roof. But when she got up to investigate, the floorboards creaked in patterns that didn't match her own steps. She checked the attic. Empty. The upstairs hallway was dark and cold, colder than the rest of the house. The next morning, she found small items moved. A teacup from the kitchen table was on the windowsill. A chair had shifted slightly. Claire tried to tell herself it was just forgetfulness or her imagination. But that night, the footsteps returned, louder, accompanied by soft whispering. "Claire." Her blood ran cold. The voice was faint, almost childlike, and coming from the corner of her room. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the corner, but nothing was there. The whispering stopped, replaced by a faint scratching, like fingernails across wood. Over the next week, the activity increased. Doors she had locked would be open when she returned. Drawers she hadn't touched were left ajar, with small items arranged oddly, coins in a circle, pens lined up neatly. She tried to record the occurrences on her phone, but each night the camera would die unexpectedly, or footage would be corrupted. One night, Claire was woken by a cold breeze and a soft giggle. She turned on her bedside lamp, and the room appeared normal, except the window was wide open, even though she had closed and locked it before bed. She pulled the curtains shut and double-checked the locks, her hands trembling. By the third week, Claire started to notice shadows moving across the walls. They weren't cast by anything in the room. Sometimes they lingered even in the light of day. She would see them from the corner of her eyes, always fleeting, always gone when she looked directly. Desperate for help, she called a local historian who knew the property's history. He told her the house had been in the family for over a century. There had been strange disappearances over the years, neighbors vanishing, children going missing, animals found mutilated. The family believed the land was cursed, that something lived within the farmhouse, feeding on fear and loneliness. Claire laughed nervously, but deep down, she felt a chill. That night the whispers were back, louder, more insistent. They weren't saying her name this time. They were speaking in a strange, garbled language, words she didn't recognize. The scratching on the floorboards became tapping, then thumping, as if something heavy was walking across the house. She tried to leave. She packed a bag, went to the car, but when she opened the door, Her keys had vanished. The car wouldn't start. She ran back into the house, panicked, and that's when she saw it. A shadow figure at the top of the staircase. Tall, thin, and hunched, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. It didn't move like a normal person. It slid down the stairs in a jerking, unnatural motion. Claire screamed. She ran through the house, trying to get out another door, but every exit she tried was blocked. Windows she had left open were now solid, unyielding. The whispers surrounded her, coming from every corner, every shadow. The figure followed silently, just watching. In a frantic attempt, she ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. She swung it at the figure, but her hands passed through empty air. The shadow stopped at the doorway, and the whispers changed. Now they were imitating her voice, repeating her own terrified words. Claire stumbled into the basement, hoping to barricade herself. The stairs groaned under her weight. Down there, she saw remnants of old rituals. Scraps of paper with symbols, dried herbs, burnt candles. Something had been here long before she arrived. The shadows pressed closer, and the whispers became voices. Countless voices, all screaming in unison. Then, everything went silent. Claire blinked, and the basement was empty. No shadows, no voices, just the smell of damp wood. She tried the stairs, but at the top, the hallway seemed distorted, longer than it should be, like the house had shifted. At the end of the hallway, a door appeared, one she didn't remember. She opened it slowly. Inside was a room she didn't recognize. The walls were lined with mirrors, all fogged over. In each reflection, Claire saw herself, but twisted, eyes black, mouth wide in a silent scream. One mirror rippled like water, and a hand reached through. She tried to pull back, but invisible force dragged her closer. The mirrors shattered simultaneously, the glass cutting her hands, and she screamed. When she looked up, the figure was gone, but the whispering remained, now inside her head. "You belong here." The next morning, neighbors noticed the farmhouse lights were on, but no one came out. The mailbox had a single envelope with Claire's handwriting on it, addressed to herself. Inside, just one sentence: "Don't answer the whispers. They already know you." Weeks later, the house was sold. The new tenants arrived, unaware of the warnings. That first night, they reported strange noises, objects moving on their own, and a shadow in the hallway that watched them sleep. The farmhouse remains, waiting for the next person who thinks they can escape the isolation, the whispers, and the shadow that feeds on fear. Story. The end. It was late summer of 2019 when 27-year-old Laura Bennett moved into her first apartment in a small town just outside Portland, Oregon. The building was old, early 1900s, wooden floors, narrow hallways, and high ceilings, but the rent was shockingly low, and the landlord assured her it had recently been renovated. Laura, fresh out of college and desperate for independence, didn't hesitate. She loved the solitude, the quiet hum of the small town, and the idea of living alone for the first time. The first night, she unpacked her boxes and tried to make the apartment feel like home. Around 11 p.m., she heard faint tapping on the window in the living room. Assuming it was a branch brushing against the glass, she ignored it. But the tapping continued, soft, irregular, almost like someone was drumming their fingers. She looked outside. No one. The street was empty, quiet except for the occasional sound of a car in the distance. She shrugged it off and went to bed. 2 nights later, she was woken by the sound of a door opening, soft, deliberate, upstairs in the apartment. Laura lived on the second floor. Her heart raced. She lived alone. She crept toward the bedroom door, grabbed her phone, and shone a flashlight toward the hallway. Nothing. Empty. Her mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the old building settling. They had the wind against the windows. Then she started noticing small things disappearing. A pair of scissors, her favorite mug, her journal. Each item would reappear in odd places. A mug in the shower, scissors in the freezer, her journal under the couch cushions. It made no sense. She thought maybe she was misplacing them, or sleepwalking, but the feeling of being watched gnawed at her. One evening, she came home from work to find her apartment door unlocked. She was certain she had locked it. Inside, the air felt heavier, colder. She checked the locks, inspected the doors, and found nothing physically wrong. She installed a small security camera she had bought online, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was causing this. The first night the camera was active, she reviewed the footage the next morning. Her stomach dropped. The video showed her apartment around 2:37 a.m. The lights flickered, the floorboards creaked, and a shadow moved across the hallway. Not a normal shadow. It was a small figure, hunched, almost childlike, moving with unnatural slowness. It stopped at her bedroom door, lingered, then vanished from view. Laura called the police, but they didn't take her seriously. Old building, they said. Electrical issues. Shadows. You're imagining things. They didn't check the footage. They didn't believe her. The next nights were worse. She began hearing whispers, so soft she could barely understand them. At first, it sounded like random words. Then, slowly, it became clearer. "Let me in." She would wake to her bedroom door slightly ajar, though she swore she had locked it. The whispers came closer, sometimes from behind her, sometimes from the closet. One night, at 3 a.m., she woke to the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of her bed. She froze, unable to move, heart hammering. A cold weight pressed against the mattress. She reached for her flashlight. Its beam illuminated nothing. The weight lifted. The whispers continued. "Don't leave me." Terrified, she decided to leave. She packed her essentials and moved in with a friend temporarily. For a few nights, she felt safe. No whispers, no strange occurrences. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, watched. Weeks later, she returned briefly to her apartment to collect some personal items. She felt an unease as soon as she stepped inside. The furniture was in slightly different positions. Items moved again. She noticed a small, muddy handprint on the inside of her bedroom door. Her blood ran cold. She ran out, calling her friend to come help her remove the last boxes. That night, she stayed in the safety of her friend's apartment. Around 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'm still here." Laura blocked the number and changed her phone, but the messages continued. Sometimes pictures, taken from inside her apartment, showing her sleeping, moving, even showering. She contacted the police again. This time, they took the reports seriously, but the investigation yielded nothing. No fingerprints, no evidence, no leads. She moved to another state, changed her phone number, and changed her locks. She swore she would never live alone again. But even years later, when she was safe in a well-lit apartment in another city, she would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of tapping on the window, faint, irregular, unmistakably deliberate. And sometimes on her phone she would receive a picture of herself sleeping, the caption beneath it simple and chilling, "Don't leave me." Story the end. It was late October when Ethan inherited the house from an uncle he barely knew. A sprawling Victorian on the outskirts of a small Pennsylvania town, it had sat empty for years, shuttered and dark, its windows staring blankly at the road like the eyes of a dead man. Ethan drove down the long gravel driveway, crunching over leaves that had fallen early with the wind. The house loomed larger as he approached, paint flaking from the siding, shingles missing, and a crooked fence that had collapsed in places. He parked in front, stomach tight with anticipation and something else, unease he couldn't place. The door was unlocked, as though it had been expecting him. He stepped inside. Dust coated every surface, and the smell of mildew and rot hung heavy. Sunlight filtered dimly through curtains caked with years of grime. The floorboards groaned under his weight, and shadows seemed to move in the corners of the rooms. He set his bag down and turned on his flashlight. Upstairs, he found the master bedroom. The ceiling was cracked, wallpaper curling, and the bed frame sagged. On a nightstand, a small notebook lay half covered in dust. He opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise, and belonged to his uncle. But the entries chilled him. Open quote, October 3rd, 1982. The walls whisper at night. I hear children crying, even when no one is here. I can't sleep. October 5th, there's a man in the hall. He doesn't move when I watch him. I shut my eyes. He's still there. He waits. October 12th, I am leaving tomorrow. The house will not let me go, but I must try. They watch. Close quote. Ethan's stomach knotted. He had come expecting a quiet escape, a place to write and paint, but reading the journal filled him with a creeping dread. He set it aside and explored the rest of the house. The first night, the wind howled outside. Ethan lay awake, listening. Floorboards creaked above him, slow, deliberate. He assumed it was the old house settling, but then a soft knock echoed from the hall outside his door. 1, 2, 3 knocks. He held his breath. Then the door handle rattled gently, though he had locked it. The next day, Ethan explored the surrounding property. The yard was overgrown, trees twisted unnaturally, as if bending toward the house. In the far corner, he noticed a small wooden shed. Its door hung open. Inside, he found dozens of small dolls, all lined up neatly. Their eyes seemed too lifelike, staring at him with a cold, knowing gaze. Some had missing limbs, others cracked faces, but all were positioned carefully, facing the same direction. A shiver ran down his spine. That night, Ethan tried to sleep with the windows shut tight. He heard whispers, low and urgent, coming from the walls. He pressed his hands over his ears. Then he felt a tug at his ankle. A small hand. He pulled the covers up, panicked. When he dared to look, no one was there, but in the corner of the room, a dark figure crouched, its head tilted unnaturally. Over the following days, Ethan noticed changes. Objects moved on their own. The notebook shifted positions, chairs were turned around, and he sometimes found notes in his own handwriting, words he didn't remember writing. Open quote, "Don't leave. Stay." Close quote. He tried to rationalize it, stress, imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left. One evening, he climbed into the attic to look for any hidden issues. The space was small, dusty, filled with broken furniture. And then he saw it. A doorway he hadn't noticed before, partially covered by old boxes. Behind it, a narrow staircase led downward into darkness. Against his better judgment, he descended. At the bottom was a cellar, damp and cold. Shapes moved in the corners, impossible to define. Then a whisper, "You're here now." Ethan froze. The walls seemed to pulse. Footsteps echoed around him, though he was alone. Dolls from the shed appeared, lined along the edges of the floor, their heads turning toward him. In the far corner, a shadow moved, then formed into a tall man, his face blurred, suit tattered. He stepped closer. Ethan stumbled backward. When he ran upstairs, the house seemed different. Hallways twisted impossibly. Doors led to rooms he hadn't seen before. Mirrors reflected spaces that didn't exist, and from every corner came faint whispers, "Stay." He tried to leave, but the car keys vanished. Windows refused to open. The house had trapped him. Days turned into nights, with no clear boundary. Ethan ate little, surviving on supplies he found in the kitchen. The whispers grew louder. Figures appeared, children, women, men, all pale, hollow-eyed, standing silently in rooms or watching from windows. They never spoke, but their presence was suffocating. He found himself writing in the notebook again, compelled, open quote, "I can't leave. The house won't let me. It knows me. I am part of it now." Close quote. One evening, he climbed the stairs to the attic again. The narrow space seemed endless. The ceiling stretched impossibly high. There, in the shadows, were dozens of figures frozen in time. The tall man stepped forward. Ethan realized with horror the man had been waiting for him all along, guiding him into the house's grasp. The dolls, the whispers, the moving objects, they were all warnings, all bait. Ethan screamed, but the sound did not carry. The attic walls pulsed, closing in. The figures reached for him. His flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed him. Weeks later, locals passing the house reported strange lights flickering in the windows. Sometimes, they said, you could hear a man screaming, a high-pitched, desperate wail. The house remained empty to the public, but those brave enough to look inside claimed they saw shapes moving behind the dusty curtains, figures with hollow eyes staring back. And if you listen closely on windy nights, you can hear whispers. Open quote, "You belong here now." Close quote. The house had claimed another, and the notebook remained open on the table, waiting for the next visitor. Story the end. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days in Millfield, Pennsylvania. Streets flooded, gutters overflowed, and the local residents were starting to get anxious. Among them was Tyler Hayes, 32, a freelance videographer who had moved to Millfield from Pittsburgh to escape the relentless pace of city life. Tyler wasn't superstitious, but the old tales surrounding the abandoned Millfield Sanitarium were hard to ignore. Once a psychiatric hospital, the building had been shut down in the 1970s after a series of mysterious patient deaths. Since then, teenagers dared each other to trespass, and urban explorers snuck in for photographs, but no one stayed overnight. Tyler, however, had a new idea, a documentary on the forgotten corners of America, focusing on abandoned mental hospitals. The sanitarium was his first stop. He arrived at dusk, the building looming like a decaying giant. Windows were shattered, ivy clawed up the sides, and the chain-link fence had large gaps where someone or something had pushed through. The air smelled of damp earth, rot, and mold. Tyler parked his car and stepped out, the rain soaking through his jacket almost immediately. He carried a camera, tripod, flashlight, and a small recorder, intending to capture ambient sounds and reactions. Inside, the main hallway stretched endlessly. Paint peeled from the walls like shedding skin. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight. He found patient rooms with broken beds, rusted wheelchairs, and journals strewn across the floor. Some pages had patient notes, some disturbing, some banal, but most ended mid-sentence, as though the writer had been interrupted. Tyler set up his camera in what had once been the nurse's station. He spoke softly to the camera, narrating the history of the hospital. His voice echoed through the empty halls. That's when he heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from the far end of the corridor. He paused, straining to hear over the rain outside. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. Tyler grabbed his flashlight and slowly advanced. "Hello? Anyone here?" His voice cracked slightly. The hallway ahead was empty, yet a cold draft swept past him, carrying a faint scent of disinfectant and decay. He aimed his camera down the hall. On the screen, nothing moved, except for a shadow at the far corner. Tyler squinted. The shadow flickered, then vanished. Curious, he moved toward it. As he approached, he heard a low whispering. The words were indistinct, overlapping like a crowd speaking just out of comprehension. His pulse quickened. He rounded a corner into a room labeled electroconvulsive therapy. Old metal chairs were bolted to the floor, restraints hanging from the sides. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were words, "Don't stay." Tyler's rational mind screamed for him to leave, but the thrill, the footage he could capture, held him there. He placed his camera on a tripod to record the room, then heard a faint, scraping sound from the ceiling above. He looked up. The ceiling tiles had shifted slightly. A shadow moved across them. Suddenly, the lights from his camera flickered, and the recorder's red light blinked erratically. The whispering grew louder, urgent. Tyler's breath fogged in the cold air. He turned to leave, but froze. A figure stood in the doorway behind him. Pale, hunched, wearing what seemed like a tattered patient gown. Its eyes were black voids. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, and a raspy, inhuman voice hissed, "Stay with us." Tyler bolted. He ran through the hallways, footsteps echoing, heart pounding. Doors that had been open moments before now slammed shut in his path. The whispers multiplied, surrounding him. He reached the main lobby, lunged for the exit, and yanked at the rusted doors, but they wouldn't budge. Panic set in. Then he felt it, a cold hand on his shoulder. He spun, nothing. The whispering intensified, now directly in his ears. Forever. Finally, the doors gave way, and Tyler stumbled into the rain, gasping, drenched. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. He tried to start the engine. Nothing. The rain beat down harder, almost as if it were trying to drown him. And then, in the rearview mirror, he saw movement. Dozens of pale, twisted figures standing in the parking lot, watching, some dragging themselves across the wet asphalt, others standing perfectly still, their faces blank and void-like. He floored it, tires spinning on the muddy road, splashing water everywhere. When he reached his apartment later that night, soaked and shivering, he locked every door, every window. The recorder from his camera, however, was still in his backpack. Out of curiosity, he played back the audio. At first, it was normal ambient noise, then came the whispering, soft at first, but growing louder. Then, unmistakably, his own voice called out, "Tyler, come back." Over the next week, strange things began. Doors he'd locked were open in the morning. Items moved from where he left them. Sometimes, in the corner of his vision, he thought he saw a pale figure, standing still, just beyond the living room window, even during the day. He avoided the footage, the recorder, the camera, but the whispering persisted. At night, it became almost unbearable, chanting, beckoning, always saying his name. One evening, Tyler returned to the sanitarium, determined to confront whatever had followed him. He set up his camera in the lobby, recording, then whispered to the empty halls, asking who or what it wanted. The camera flickered. The shadows on the walls twisted unnaturally. The temperature dropped. He felt a breath on the back of his neck and spun around. There in the doorway was a line of figures. Patients, staff, twisted by some unknown force, their faces pale, eyes hollow. One of them stepped forward, and Tyler recognized a man from the local papers, a missing janitor from the 1980s. Tyler raised his camera. The figure spoke, voice like gravel. You found us. Now you belong. The feed from his camera continued to broadcast the scene live for hours. When authorities arrived the next morning, the building was empty. No sign of Tyler, no sign of the figures. The camera lay on the floor, still recording. On it, a single frame showed Tyler, pale, expressionless, standing at the back of the line, staring directly into the lens. Locals swear that on rainy nights, you can hear whispers near the ruins of the sanitarium. Visitors report fleeting glimpses of pale faces behind broken windows, dragging themselves along the halls, calling out names, sometimes their own. Tyler's apartment has been abandoned for months, yet neighbors report lights flickering inside and soft knocking at the windows when the rain falls. And in the footage, every so often, if you watch closely, you can see a new figure standing at the back of the line. Pale, expressionless, waiting, watching, whispering. Story the end. It was a quiet September evening in rural Ohio when Mark Hansen moved into his late uncle's farmhouse. The house had been abandoned for over a year, but Mark wanted a fresh start. He'd just left a messy breakup and needed time alone. The first night, everything seemed normal, just the creaks of an old house settling and the hum of cicadas outside. Around midnight, Mark was woken by a faint tapping on his bedroom window. At first, he thought it was a branch brushing against the glass, but when he looked outside, the yard was empty. Uneasy, he went back to bed, convincing himself it was nothing. The next day, he found scratches on the windowsill, 3 long, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. He shrugged it off as a possible animal, though the marks looked deliberate. That night, the noises returned, tapping, scratching, faint whispers calling his name. Mark, they said. Soft at first, almost like a breeze, but growing louder and more insistent. Mark got up to investigate, checking every corner of the house. Nothing. But then he noticed something disturbing, the reflection of a figure in the hallway mirror, tall and thin, standing just behind him. When he spun around, the hall was empty. Over the next week, the presence became more aggressive. Doors would slam shut on their own, drawers left open. His food went missing from the kitchen, and small objects, keys, notebooks, a coffee mug, would appear in odd places, always near the hallway mirror. One night, Mark decided to record the activity. He set up a camera in the bedroom and left it running. When he reviewed the footage the next morning, his blood ran cold. Around 2:13 a.m., a shadow moved across the room, tall, distorted, sliding along the floor without legs. It stopped at the edge of the bed and leaned close, though no face was visible. The camera caught the faint outline of a hand reaching toward him. Mark didn't sleep that night. At 2:13 a.m., he heard the whispers in person, louder than ever. "Don't leave. Stay." His heart pounded. The shadows moved along the walls, curling and twisting unnaturally. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it across the room. Nothing but darkness. The next day, Mark reached out to a local historian who told him the farmhouse had a long, dark history. The land had been in the family for generations, and each owner reported strange occurrences, disappearances, phantom voices, objects moving by themselves. Locals claimed the house was hungry, feeding on those who stayed too long. Mark tried to leave, but the truck wouldn't start. The keys he placed on the counter disappeared. Panic set in as the shadows followed him from room to room, always at the edge of his vision. Sometimes he would see the figure reflected in mirrors when no one else was in the house. On the 7th night, the activity escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. The floorboards groaned as if someone heavy was pacing upstairs, the whispers repeating his name endlessly. Mark tried to barricade himself in a bedroom, but the doorknob rattled violently and the lights flickered. Then the figure appeared, tall, faceless, limbs elongated unnaturally, moving against the laws of nature. It raised a hand, pointing at him. His limbs froze, and he could feel an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. The whispering turned into a chorus, countless voices chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." Mark lost consciousness. When he awoke, it was dawn. The house was silent, the figure gone. But on the hallway mirror, smeared in condensation, were words he didn't write. "You cannot leave. You belong here now." Terrified, Mark tried to contact friends, but every phone call failed. The line went dead, the battery drained instantly. He packed a bag and ran, leaving the house behind. Weeks later, investigators found the farmhouse empty. The windows were all locked from the inside. The camera footage from Mark's bedroom remained, showing the same shadow figure, motionless in the corner, staring directly at the lens. Locals say the house waits, patient and silent during the day, hungering at night. Those who stay too long hear whispers, see shadows in mirrors, and sometimes vanish entirely. Mark has not been seen since that night. Occasionally, hikers report seeing a figure in the window, tall and faceless, watching them, and a faint whisper, "Stay." Story the end. The town of Hartsville, Indiana had a quiet unease about it that few outsiders noticed. But for those who lived there, the stories of the old Holloway house weren't just tales, they were warnings. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, a hulking Victorian structure with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. Locals said that anyone who entered after dark never came back the same, or didn't come back at all. Evan Mitchell, 29, had recently moved to Hartsville to teach at the community college. He wasn't superstitious, but he had a fascination with forgotten places and urban legends. One night, over beers with a colleague, he boasted that he would explore Holloway House. "It's just an old house," he said. "Nothing can hurt me." By midnight, Evan was parked in the overgrown driveway, flashlight and camera in hand. The iron gate creaked as he pushed it open, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. The front porch groaned under his weight as he approached the main door, peeling paint revealing dark wood beneath. He forced the lock and stepped inside. The foyer smelled of mold and decay. Wallpaper hung in tatters and the floorboards creaked under every step. As Evan explored, he noticed the furniture was covered in white sheets, as if someone had tried to preserve the rooms. Dust floated in the flashlight beam, disturbed by his movements. He set up his camera to record the hallway, narrating his exploration for a small online series he hoped to launch. As he turned into the dining room, he froze. On the far wall, a figure stood in the shadows, a woman in a long, tattered dress, hair matted and dark, head slightly tilted. Evan raised his flashlight, but the figure vanished, leaving only the faintest outline against the wallpaper. He shook it off, just a trick of the light. Then he heard it. A soft, deliberate tapping coming from the second floor. He hadn't noticed the staircase before. His rational mind screamed to leave, but curiosity pushed him upward. The staircase spiraled to the second floor, each step groaning under his weight. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic, like someone was pacing. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness. Doors lined both sides, all closed except one at the far end. From it came the tapping, and now faint whispers. Evan crept closer. He peered into the room, empty except for a rocking chair moving slowly on its own. The whispers were louder now, circling around him, words indecipherable but urgent. He backed up, tripping over a loose floorboard. The chair stopped. Silence. Evan decided he had enough. He turned to leave but froze at the foot of the stairs. Shadows were moving along the walls, elongated, twisting forms, stretching and bending unnaturally. The whispers returned, now in clear words. "Stay. Stay forever." Panic surged. Evan bolted down the stairs. Doors slammed shut on their own, forcing him back into the hallway. He ran through the foyer, reached the front door, yanked it open, but something cold and heavy slammed against him from behind. He tumbled outside onto the overgrown lawn. As he scrambled to his car, headlights from nowhere illuminated the mansion. From the second-floor windows, dozens of pale faces stared out at him. Mouths opened in silent screams. Arms pressed against the glass as if trying to reach him. Evan didn't look back. He started the car, peeled out of the driveway, and didn't stop until he was well into town. For weeks, Evan avoided Holloway House, but the memories haunted him. At night, he heard faint tapping in his apartment. Shadows seemed to stretch and bend unnaturally in corners. His camera, left in the trunk of his car, captured movement he didn't see in real life. Fleeting glimpses of pale figures in his apartment, standing silently in the background of photographs, sometimes closer, sometimes further, always staring. One evening, he returned home to find a single chair in the middle of his living room. It was old, wooden, the kind that could rock. He hadn't owned it. It faced the corner. A slow creak announced it was moving. He tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. He could hear whispers circling the room, saying his name, repeating endlessly, "Stay, stay forever." Evan disappeared the next morning. The neighbors found his apartment locked from the inside, no sign of forced entry, no note, nothing, except for the rocking chair, still moving, and the faint whispers in the air. Weeks later, the local police investigated Holloway House after reports of lights flickering in the abandoned windows. When they entered, they found the front door ajar. Inside, the staircase leading to the second floor was intact, but on the landing lay a camera. It belonged to Evan. On the footage, his exploration played in real time until the last moments. Then, a pale figure reached into the frame, and the video cut to static. Locals whisper now that anyone entering Holloway House is never truly alone. Some say you can hear footsteps behind you, even when no one is there. Others claim that if you look into the windows, dozens of pale faces will stare back. And if one of them beckons you, the only way out is to join them. Evan's belongings were later found scattered along the edge of the woods. His camera and tripod were gone. His apartment, locked and empty, showed no sign he'd ever returned. And sometimes in the dead of night, the neighbors swear they hear the faint sound of a rocking chair in the middle of the street, accompanied by whispering, calling out names, waiting. Story the end. It started with a phone call in the middle of the night. Sarah Mitchell had been sleeping in her small apartment in upstate New York when the shrill ring of her cell jolted her awake. Her first thought was that it was a wrong number at 3 a.m. Who calls? She answered groggily, "Hello?" Silence. Then a soft, rasping whisper, "I'm here." Sarah's heart stopped. "Who is this?" she demanded, sitting up and fumbling for the bedside lamp. There was only static. Then the line went dead. Shaking, she tried to tell herself it was a prank. Her apartment was in a quiet building, and though she lived alone, she'd never felt unsafe. Still, that phrase, "I'm here," echoed in her mind. The next morning, Sarah found something odd. On her doorstep was a small envelope, unmarked. Inside was a photograph of her apartment from the street, taken in the dark. On the back, someone had written, "You were asleep. I saw everything." She called the police. Officer Harris, a young man with a kind face, came by and took her statement. "We'll check the area, see if anyone's lurking," he said, but there was no evidence of anyone near the building. Her neighbors said they hadn't seen anyone strange. Sarah tried to shake it off. That night, she locked every door and window. Yet, as she tried to sleep, she heard faint footsteps outside her apartment. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but when she leaned against the door, she felt a faint vibration as if someone were pressing against it from the other side. The next morning, her mailbox held another envelope. This time it contained a small object, a key. Along with it, a note, "You can't lock me out." Panic set in. Sarah stayed with a friend for a few nights, but the harassment didn't stop. Texts arrived on her phone with no sender, showing photos of her walking to work, her grocery trips, her morning coffee. Every photo was timestamped. One evening, after returning from a late shift at a diner, she found her apartment door unlocked, the lock broken from the inside. She screamed and ran to the lobby to find Officer Harris waiting. He called back up, and they searched the building. No one was found. Nothing was missing. But when they returned, Sarah noticed something chilling. Her bedroom mirror was covered in writing, etched deep into the glass. "Look behind you." Her head whipped around. The room was empty. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the corner with a baseball bat, shaking, listening to the building's creaks and groans. Days turned into weeks. The harassment escalated. The photographs started appearing inside her apartment, on her pillow, inside her refrigerator, even taped to her shower wall. Each photo showed her sleeping, unaware, alone. Sarah started seeing shadows out of the corners of her eyes, fleeting glimpses of a figure standing in the hall just beyond the reach of the light. She attempted to leave town. She packed her car and drove to a motel 2 hours away. For a night, she felt relief. But the phone call came again. "Why run?" The same rasping voice whispered, "I'm always here." The next morning, a package waited at the motel door. Inside, a small box contained a tiny replica of her car, and inside the model was a miniature figure of a person standing beside it. A note read, "Driving again, I see you." Terror gripped her. She realized this wasn't a human stalker, at least not entirely. The way the person, or thing, knew where she was, how quickly it followed, made no sense. Even miles away, it found her. Sarah's friends tried to help. They offered to let her stay with them, but the threats followed. Texts with screenshots of her locations, packages at her door, whispers on the phone at all hours. One friend suggested calling a psychic. Out of desperation, she agreed. The psychic, an older woman with piercing eyes, came to the motel. "You cannot fight this," the psychic said, her voice trembling. "It isn't a man. It isn't a person. It feeds on fear, and it tracks you. It enjoys being close. It will wait, watch, and grow stronger if you hide." Sarah felt the weight of those words. She left the motel the next day, moving again, trying to stay ahead. She never stayed in one place more than a few nights, changing her appearance, her routines, even her name. She stopped going to work, stopped calling friends, even avoided strangers on the street. But it always found her. Always. One rainy evening, she arrived at a cabin deep in the woods, thinking isolation would finally save her. She barricaded the doors and windows, set up cameras, and tried to stay awake. Around midnight, a knocking came. Not at the door, not at the windows, but from the floor beneath her. Sarah's knees shook. She called the police from her cell. Officer Harris answered again, the same calm voice she'd clung to for weeks. But this time, the line was cut off. The knocking grew louder. Then came the whispers, hundreds of them, echoing in the walls. "You cannot hide. You are mine." She tried to run, but when she reached the door, she found the key inside the lock, the same key from weeks ago, already inserted. It turned. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The next morning, hikers found the cabin empty. Sarah's belongings were scattered, her phone still plugged into the wall. On the cabin walls, deep scratches formed letters. "I watched you sleep. Now I live with you." No one ever saw Sarah again. Those who discovered the cabin reported a strange feeling, a presence that seemed to linger, cold and oppressive. Locals avoided the area, whispering about a curse, about a shadow that stalked travelers, about someone or something that would never let its prey go. Stories began circulating in town. They said if you were alone at night and heard whispers through your phone or saw someone's shadow standing at the edge of your vision, you should run. But the people who ran, they never truly escaped. Some nights, if you drive the winding roads upstate and glance at the trees, you might see her. Not Sarah herself, but the shape of a person, watching. Always watching, waiting for the next one who thinks they're safe. Story the end. It was early November when Rachel decided to take a break from her job in Boston and spend a week at her late grandmother's lake house in Maine. The property had been in the family for generations, tucked away at the edge of a dense forest, with a long wooden dock stretching over dark, still water. She arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The house itself was old, painted a fading white, with windows staring blankly like eyes, some cracked, others boarded. The porch creaked under her steps as she carried her bags inside. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and old wood. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Rachel flicked on the lights. Most bulbs were dead. She found a flashlight in a drawer and turned it on. The living room was cluttered with furniture covered in sheets. On the mantel lay a small journal. She picked it up. It belonged to her grandmother. Flipping through, she noticed entries that chilled her. Open quote, October 11th, 1965. "I hear it at night, breathing through the walls. I swear it's watching." October 15th, 1965. "Footsteps on the dock. No one is there. The water moves strangely, ripples without wind." October 20th, 1965. "I feel it in the forest. It waits. I cannot leave." Close quote. Rachel shivered. She told herself it was just old age and paranoia, but the words left an uneasy weight in her chest. She unpacked, set the journal aside, and made herself a cup of tea. That night, the wind howled, shaking the house. Rachel lay in bed, listening. At first, the usual creaks of an old house, but then soft, deliberate footsteps on the porch outside. She held her breath, then a scratching at the window. She turned on her flashlight and shone it toward the sound. Nothing. Her heart pounded, and she forced herself to sleep. The next day, she explored the forest behind the house. The trees were unnaturally dense and the underbrush thick. She noticed strange markings carved into the bark, circles, lines, symbols she didn't recognize. Every time she turned around, the forest seemed darker, more oppressive. She hurried back to the house. That night, she woke to the sound of the water lapping against the dock, though the lake had been perfectly still when she looked before bed. She sat up, a figure crouched at the end of the dock, pale, thin, with dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. Rachel froze. The figure didn't move. She blinked, and it was gone. Over the next few days, Rachel noticed small, unsettling things. Items moved when she wasn't looking, doors that were closed the night before found open, whispers that came from the walls. She tried to leave, but her car battery died inexplicably. She called a tow service, but the driver could not find the house. It seemed to vanish from the road. One evening, she was in the attic, searching for extra blankets. The hatch creaked open on its own. Inside, dust swirled in the flashlight beam. Among broken furniture and boxes, she found a trapdoor in the floor. Trembling, she opened it and descended. The basement was cold, damp, and filled with shapes just out of focus. Dolls, some cracked and missing eyes, were arranged around the edges. On a table, the journal lay open again, though she hadn't touched it in days. The entries were new, written in handwriting not her grandmother's. Open quote, "She is here. She cannot leave. The lake calls her name. It hungers." Close quote. Rachel turned to flee, but the basement walls pulsed. Shadows moved along them, stretching and writhing. A whisper, "Stay." She ran upstairs, but the layout of the house had changed. Hallways twisted impossibly. Doors led to rooms she didn't recognize. Every window showed the forest outside, but it was endless, dark and alive with movement. Figures appeared. Children, adults, all pale and hollow-eyed. They didn't speak, but their presence was suffocating. Rachel felt compelled to move toward them, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. She tried to resist, screaming, but no sound came. The dolls she had found were now scattered through the house, always watching. Days passed, or perhaps hours or minutes. Time lost meaning. Rachel wrote in the journal herself, though she didn't remember picking up a pen. Open quote, "I cannot leave. The house will not let me. The forest calls. The lake waits. I belong here now." Close quote. One night she climbed to the attic again. The ceiling stretched impossibly high. The figures were there, taller now, surrounding her. The pale man from the dock stepped forward. He reached for her. Rachel realized she had been trapped from the moment she entered. The house, the lake, the forest, it had been waiting. All it wanted was her presence. Locals later reported lights flickering in the abandoned lake house, shadows moving behind the windows. Those brave enough to approach said they could hear whispers carried on the wind. Open quote, "You belong here. Always." Close quote. No one ever entered the house again. And Rachel, she was never seen outside it. Sometimes, when the mist rises from the lake, a pale figure can be seen standing at the water's edge, staring, waiting for the next visitor to answer the house's silent call. Story the end. It was late October in the small town of Maple Hollow, Pennsylvania, the kind of place that was beautiful by day and unnervingly quiet at night. The woods surrounding the town stretched for miles, and the locals had long whispered about something that lived deep in the trees, something they called the Watcher. No one really believed in it, of course, but they remembered the disappearances. In 1998, 3 teenagers vanished while camping near the old fire tower. Their tent was found shredded, their belongings scattered. No blood, no footprints, no explanation. The police blamed a bear. Locals weren't so sure. 25 years later, the story was nothing more than a chilling legend told at bonfires, until Tyler Grant decided to prove it was fake. Tyler was 27, a freelance filmmaker who made documentaries about strange American folklore. He'd built a small online following by exploring abandoned places and forgotten legends. When someone commented, "Do the Watcher next," he couldn't resist. He packed his gear, 3 cameras, a drone, a tent, and supplies, and drove into Maple Hollow. The locals at the diner tried to talk him out of it. An old man named Henry looked him dead in the eye and said, "You don't go into those woods after dark, son. It don't like to be watched." Tyler smiled politely. "That's what everyone says before I make a viral video." That afternoon, he hiked 2 miles into the forest and set up camp near the remnants of the old fire tower. It was a skeletal structure of rusted metal and decaying wood, surrounded by decades of moss and vines. The forest was eerily quiet. Even the birds seemed to avoid it. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Tyler set up his cameras around the clearing. He spoke into his handheld camcorder. Locals say the Watcher comes at night. Some describe it as a shadow. Others say it looks like a man, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with eyes that reflect light like an animal. Tonight we find out the truth. He laughed, but it came out forced. He wasn't sure why, but the silence of the forest was pressing in on him. At 11:47 p.m., the first strange thing happened. His motion detector camera picked up something moving 30 yards away. Just a flicker. He pointed his flashlight in that direction, but there was nothing. Then the forest began to sound wrong. Not loud, just off. Every now and then, a dry rustling but no wind. A branch snapping but no animals visible. He tried to focus on his camera feed, watching the screens inside his tent. At 12:03 a.m., one of the cameras glitched. The feed cut to static, then back again, only now there was a figure in the distance. It stood between the trees, facing the camera. Tyler leaned closer to the monitor. What the hell? He switched on his flashlight and stepped outside. The air was colder now, his breath visible. The forest was utterly still. The sound of his own breathing was the only thing he could hear. He aimed his light toward where the figure had been. Nothing. But when he turned around, the figure was closer, behind his tent. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, thin and wrong. Its limbs seemed too long, its head slightly tilted. He couldn't make out its face, only 2 points of pale light where its eyes should be. Tyler stumbled back, his flashlight trembling. "Hey, who's there?" The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it lifted one arm and pointed toward him. The flashlight flickered and died. Tyler ran. He sprinted through the trees, heart pounding, branches slashing his arms. He could hear something behind him, soft, deliberate steps, not running, just walking. The sound stayed close no matter how fast he went. When he finally looked back, it wasn't there. But the woods looked wrong now. The trees seemed twisted, unfamiliar. His GPS showed static. The cameras, he realized with horror, had stopped recording. Every single one. He spent the night sitting with his back to a tree, clutching a knife he'd brought just in case. Every so often, he heard movement, a soft rustle, breathing that wasn't his own. Sometimes he thought he saw pale lights shifting between the trees, watching him. At dawn, he stumbled back toward his car. He didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke up lying on the forest floor with his cameras gone. Only one remained, the handheld one, lying next to him, still recording. When he reached town, he went straight to the police. They watched his footage. At first, it showed what he expected. His setup, his commentary, the static glitch. Then came the moment he ran outside, and that's where things got strange. From that point on, the video changed. It showed him talking to someone who wasn't there. His flashlight beam swept over empty air, but he was nodding, responding, as if listening to a voice. At one point, he said softly, "I understand." Then he turned the camera toward his face and smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. His lips were trembling, his eyes glassy and unfocused. The video ended with him walking into the trees, camera in hand, whispering something the audio couldn't quite catch. The police organized a search, but the forest seemed to change every day. Paths disappeared, GPS devices malfunctioned. They found Tyler's car, but no trace of him. Weeks later, hikers discovered his cameras deep in the woods, hanging from tree branches like ornaments. Each one showed footage of the same clearing from different angles. In every video, a figure stood just at the edge of the frame, unmoving, watching. The final camera was pointed toward the fire tower. At the very end of the footage, just before it cut to static, the figure stepped closer. Its face was visible now, smooth, featureless, except for 2 pale, lidless eyes that blinked sideways. And in the background, faintly, Tyler's voice could be heard whispering, "It's my turn to watch." Since then, hikers near Maple Hollow have reported seeing a man standing in the trees at night, holding a camera, his eyes glowing faintly white. And if you call out to him, he raises his hand, points at you, says, and whispers something you can't quite hear, until it's too late. Story the end. It was late September when Michael and his wife Laura decided to move into a quiet rental home in a small Ohio town called Milford. They had been struggling to make ends meet in the city, and this old house, cheap, isolated, surrounded by cornfields, felt like a new beginning. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Crane, met them with a polite smile, but avoided eye contact when Michael asked about the house's history. "It's been here a long time," Crane said. "A lot longer than most folks realize. Don't go poking around the basement, though. The foundation's unstable." They laughed about it afterward, thinking he was just being cautious. The house was 2 stories, creaky but charming. It smelled faintly of dust and damp soil, and the wallpaper was yellowed and peeling. The first night, they unpacked and went to bed early. The air was still. Sometime after midnight, Laura woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, dragging. She shook Michael awake, but by the time he listened, it was silent again. "Old houses make noises," he muttered and rolled over. But Laura swore she heard someone breathing, low and steady, just outside their bedroom door. The next morning, they found small, muddy footprints in the kitchen, barefoot, child-sized. There had been no rain, no children. Michael cleaned them up and brushed it off, but Laura stayed uneasy. That night, she set her phone camera to record the hallway. When she checked the footage in the morning, her stomach dropped. At 3:12 a.m., the video showed a small figure standing at the end of the hall. It didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. It was hard to see in the dark, but the outline was unmistakable. A child. Then, as if sensing the camera, the figure slowly tilted its head toward it before the feed cut out. They showed it to Mr. Crane, his face drained of color. "You didn't go down there, did you?" he asked. Michael frowned. "Down where?" Crane's eyes darted toward the kitchen. The basement. They hadn't. Not yet. 2 nights later, they heard something scraping beneath the floorboards. A rhythmic, slow scratching like nails dragging across wood. Michael, tired of feeling on edge, grabbed a flashlight and pried open the basement door. Cold, musty air rushed up from below. The light beam disappeared into darkness. The smell hit them. Rotting wood, something metallic, and something else they couldn't place. He stepped down, careful on the old steps. The concrete floor below was uneven, cracked. Cobwebs hung like curtains. Then his light fell on a shape in the corner, a wooden rocking horse, covered in dust. Beside it, an old metal bed frame, small, child-sized. On the wall, someone had scratched words into the concrete. "Play with me." Laura screamed behind him. He turned and saw faint movement in the far corner. A small shadow shifting, hunched over. He bolted up the stairs, slammed the door, and nailed it shut. They tried to leave the next morning, but the car wouldn't start. Michael checked the engine. Nothing seemed wrong. He tried calling a tow truck, but there was no signal. Every attempt to use their phones failed. Laura said it felt like the air in the house was heavier, thicker somehow, like breathing underwater. That night, Laura woke again at 3:12, the same time as before. She heard a child's laughter, soft, echoing through the walls. She shook Michael, but he didn't stir. She climbed out of bed, trembling, and followed the sound to the hallway. At the end stood the same small figure, pale and motionless. She whispered, "Who are you?" The figure's voice was faint, childlike. "You took my room." Laura backed away, heart pounding. When she blinked, the figure was gone. But the next morning, the words "my room" were scrawled in ash on their bedroom mirror. Michael decided they were leaving. Immediately. They packed bags, threw them in the car, and tried to drive off. The car started this time, but when they turned onto the main road, something was wrong. No matter which direction they drove, they always ended up back in front of the house. The same mailbox, the same leaning oak tree, the same sagging porch. It was as if the world had folded in on itself. That evening, Michael saw movement outside the window. Dozens of figures stood in the cornfield, unmoving, faces pale and featureless. Laura whispered, "We have to go." They ran out the back door into the field. The corn was high, dry, and sharp. The stalks rustled even when the wind was still. They pushed through, trying to reach the road, but the rows seemed endless. Then Laura screamed. Michael turned, and she was gone. Only the sound of laughter, faint like a child's. He ran, stumbling, breaking through the stalks until he saw a faint light. A doorway, freestanding in the middle of the field. It was the basement door, the same one from the house. From inside, he heard Laura crying. "Help me," she sobbed. He stepped closer. The door creaked open, darkness beyond. He reached out, and something grabbed his wrist, ice cold and small, like a child's hand. He screamed, pulled away, and the door slammed shut, vanishing. The field was silent. When he finally found his way back to the house, dawn was breaking. He opened the front door and froze. Laura stood in the kitchen, her back to him. "Laura?" She turned slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and empty. "You shouldn't have left me down there," she whispered. Michael stumbled back, heart racing. What are you talking about? You left me with her." The lights flickered. Behind Laura, a small girl appeared, maybe 6 years old, her skin gray, her eyes hollow pits. She held Laura's hand. The girl smiled. "Now you can both stay." The house groaned as if alive. The walls began to close in. Michael screamed, running for the front door, but when he opened it, all he saw was darkness. He fell forward and kept falling, endlessly. Days later, Mr. Crane returned to check the property. The car was still there, packed with bags. The house was silent, empty, or so it seemed. In the kitchen, he noticed new muddy footprints, small ones, leading to the basement door. The nails had been pried loose. As he backed away, he heard a soft giggle behind him. He turned. Nothing. But when he reached his car, he saw something in the rearview mirror. A little girl standing in the upstairs window, watching. The next tenants moved in 6 months later. They never stayed more than a week. Story the end. It started on a humid summer night in rural Missouri. Jack Reynolds, a 27-year-old software developer, had moved into a small rental cabin about 30 minutes outside of town. He wanted solitude, peaceful nights away from the city to work on his new project, but the isolation quickly became unsettling. The first few nights were uneventful. Jack enjoyed the creaks and groans of the old wooden cabin, attributing them to age and humidity. But on the fourth night, he woke to the sound of whispering. At first, he thought it was the wind rattling the windows, but the voice was too clear, too deliberate, and distinctly male. Jack. He sat up in bed, heart hammering, listening. The whisper came again, this time from the corner of the room near the closet. He flipped on the light. Nothing. Just his clothes hanging neatly and the faint smell of cedar from the closet liner. Shaking off the fear, Jack chalked it up to exhaustion. He'd been working late hours and decided to get some sleep. The next morning, however, he found small scratches on the inside of the closet door, 3 short, parallel lines. He couldn't explain them. Over the next week, things escalated. Objects in the cabin moved when he wasn't looking. The keys to his truck would appear on the kitchen counter after he swore he left them on the bedside table. His laptop would shut down in the middle of coding sessions, always when he was close to making progress. Sometimes he would wake to find a chair pulled out from the desk, though he was certain he hadn't touched it. Jack installed security cameras, thinking he might catch a trespasser. The footage showed nothing. No animals, no people. But occasionally, a shadow would appear in the corner of the frame, indistinct and blurry, as if out of focus. One night, around 1:45 a.m., Jack was working when he heard the whisper again. This time it came from behind the bathroom door. He froze, listening. Jack. The voice was clearer, almost impatient. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the door. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror fogged up, though no water had been running. Words formed on the glass in the condensation. You can't leave. Jack stumbled back, heart pounding. He tried to leave the cabin the next morning, but his truck wouldn't start. The battery was dead, though it had been fine the night before. He called a tow service, but the line went dead mid-conversation, and when he dialed again, no one answered. The whispers grew louder, now in multiple voices. At night, Jack could hear them coming from the attic above the bedroom, pacing back and forth. Sometimes he swore he could hear footsteps on the roof as well, moving slowly, deliberately. After a week, Jack's friends noticed he was withdrawing. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands jittery from lack of sleep. When he explained what was happening, most laughed, thinking he was stressed or imagining things. But one friend, a local named Tom, believed him and offered to come over to check the cabin. Tom arrived one evening, armed with flashlights and an old hunting rifle. They spent hours inspecting the cabin, checking the attic, basement, and surrounding woods. Nothing seemed out of place, but as they sat in the living room, the temperature dropped suddenly and the lights flickered. A shadow passed across the room, tall and distorted, moving against the natural flow of light. Tom swore he saw eyes, hollow, black, staring from the corner of the room. He yelled for Jack to grab his things and leave, but Jack froze, staring at the same corner, mesmerized. Then the voices started chanting, low and guttural, "Stay, stay, stay!" Jack felt his body weaken, as if invisible hands were gripping his limbs. Tom grabbed him and dragged him outside. They ran to the truck, which this time started immediately. The engine roared, and they sped toward town, glancing back only once to see the cabin's front door slowly closing on its own. Jack didn't return for months. He stayed with friends, moving cautiously from place to place, always feeling as though he was being watched. He began documenting everything, the scratches, the whispers, the shadows, hoping for some rational explanation. But there was none. Months later, he received a letter at a friend's address, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. The cabin, dark except for a light in the attic window. In the shadows of the window, a figure stood, tall, thin, with hollow eyes. Below the photograph, scribbled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "You left, but I'm already inside." Jack's friends noticed he became reclusive, refusing to stay in any house for long. He changed apartments, then cities, but the whispers followed him. At night, he could hear scratching on walls, the faint sound of footsteps behind him when he was alone, and sometimes a soft voice calling his name. One night, Jack checked his reflection in a bathroom mirror at a motel. At first, everything seemed normal. Then, in the reflection, his eyes darkened, hollowed out, as though something was peering through them. A whisper echoed behind him. "Finally, I can see you." Jack turned, flashlight trembling in his hand, but the room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, his reflection smiled, even though he hadn't. A week later, he disappeared. The motel room was found empty, the door locked from the inside. His belongings were untouched, except for his journal, open to a page where he had scribbled frantically. "It's in the house, in every house. Watching, waiting." Locals claim that if you drive past the old cabin on quiet nights, you can see a shadow in the attic window and sometimes hear whispers calling out your name. No one who goes inside ever comes out the same. Some leave in terror, but others vanish completely. The cabin remains patient, waiting for the next guest who seeks solitude. Story the end.